We have a quorum. Councilmember Peterson is not going to be able to be with us today. I do believe we expect Councilmember Jones. Okay, so I'm sure she'll join us as soon as she can. I'll call the meeting to order, and we have a work session today. The topic is water and wastewater, and everyone has the agenda ahead in front of them. We have a long day ahead, so I think we should just dive right in.
All right, Mayor and Council. First of all, thank you for participating in this workshop today and spending the necessary time to make what we believe are some pretty significant decisions. Today marks the culmination of a year-long journey. Literally, when I got here, staff started talking to me about the challenges of water and wastewater. You'll remember that there was a workshop scheduled in June of last year that we pulled because we weren't ready. We had a conversation with you in July to begin to frame the challenges, but we're not prepared to make final recommendations. We really left that July meeting with the expectation we would be back in November. And today is March 24th, so it literally has taken a year. There are some compelling reasons for that time frame. One is the comprehensive plan that you've mandated that we follow is pretty clear on the expected outcome. So it took us some significant time to ensure that the recommendation that we were going to present to you would not represent the need for a do-over in 10 years. I have a personally vested interest in that because I'd like to be your city manager about 15 years, and I do not, in the course of that 15 years, want to have to do over a decision I was instrumental in ensuring got made. Tracy, Curtis, and Trey feel the same way. So we have spent a significant amount of time getting to this point. The agenda is laid out with this in mind. We're going to take you on a very quick journey in session 1 of water. We will take you on a quick journey of wastewater in session 2. Session 3 will talk about a possible partnership with Aqua and why that is beneficial short-term and long-term for Bastrop. And then in session 4, we'll talk about the next steps. In both the water and wastewater, Trey's going to lead water, Curtis is going to lead wastewater. The first half of that discussion is intended to help you appreciate the journey that we have taken to get to the conversation of making a decision. It will include strategic elements such as your vision, mission, statements, your 9 focus areas, as well as the comprehensive plan goals that are driving the workshop. Each will discuss the operational challenges that we have with our existing plant and why something must be done. We will then, at the conclusion of each one of those overviews, outline the questions that we identified that must be addressed in order for you to make a final decision. HDR has been a partner with us in this journey. We hired them to analyze the water and wastewater questions that we identified. We appreciate that when you get to the place and see the numbers, there's going to be sticker shock. I will tell you, it is what it is. We really are out of choices. So we felt that it was important for someone who makes their living do this to come in, explain the situation from an engineering perspective and address any questions that you may have. So today literally is a 5-hour version of a year-long journey, and I'm sure y'all appreciate we've condensed it down to 5 hours, but in the event that you thought that was too long, it's really short when you think about it. Staff is very excited about today. The reason for that is this. It is not lost on any of us the significance of the challenges we have as a community are facing. The least of which is, or the most significant probably, is the $2 million deficit that we have to overcome in the next few years relative to sales tax that we know is sitting out there. We cannot do much in the way of commercial building without addressing water and sewer. We know we need to diversify our sales tax and grow our property tax base, but in order to do that, we need affordable housing. You can't build houses without water and sewer. So when you really begin to look at the economic development challenges, the growth challenges, the housing challenges, all of which we need to be able to grow and overcome some of the financial sustainability issues we know are in our future, all roads lead back to water and sewer. And literally, you will make decisions today that will allow us now to begin to work towards solving those problems. Water and sewer has been the roadblock, it's been the obstacle, and we couldn't meet with developers and make decisions because we didn't know what the end game was going to look like. So today, you will provide a level of clarity that is extraordinarily important for us to get busy about solving our future issues. So if I haven't indicated to you how important it is, please know that this is huge. All of the reports that will be referenced today in the PowerPoints and the actual PowerPoint presentations themselves will be uploaded to your Dropbox at the conclusion of this meeting. Yes. No, I have purposely not given it to you because I need you to pay attention. So when you get through and go home and have that quiet moment, it will be there for you to study. And no decisions are going to be made today that will cost you, will require you to write checks today. These are policy decisions. So if additional information is needed, additional questions will be needed, there will be more than ample opportunities between now and then to do it. So don't think, oh my God, I'm making a decision today and I haven't read the report. You're just going to make some high-level directional decisions today so we can now move forward and get better information from which you can make a decision. So, Mayor and Council, with that, I'm going to turn the water portion over to Trey, and we will, for the most part, tag team this. If you have a question as we go, please don't hesitate to ask. We have limited the conversation on the overviews to about 45 minutes. Both Curtis and Trey could literally spend a day each convincing you that there were issues with water and sewer, so the challenge for them is to keep it at a high level under 45 minutes. But we're certainly happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Good morning, thank you. So to go over the slide here, we want to talk about, of course, our vision and mission. Vision and mission in the comprehensive plan is to make sure we have a water supply. That's the ultimate goal that we're going to reach to. That 2.2. We'll talk about the water system and the facts. We'll review the water CCN and the system facts there. What's important to remember is that our wastewater is 3 times larger than our water system. So that is epic, and making sure that everybody gets served by one utility is just impossible for that much larger. So
can you say that statement again?
Our water CCN is wastewater CCN, is 3 times larger than our water CCN. So we can serve wastewater all the way out to the end of our ETJ, and our water is in our city limits at this moment.
Okay.
So we're quite a bit larger in the wastewater side. And to understand the resources and what we have and the decision points we're going to make to get there. So we'll go over the vision statement. Everybody's familiar with it. I'm sure you guys have to write it. We'll be welcoming nice tapestry of people, arts, all the good stuff you're already familiar with. Our mission statement again is to be efficient, proactive. Those are the key words we want to focus on today. To enhance our quality of life and achieve our vision. Again, we're going to put back up on the 9 focus areas, which you guys are very familiar with: fiscal responsibility, economic vitality. I think we're really included in managed growth here. Community safety is going to be touched, organizational excellence, fiscal responsibility, economic vitality. So this kind of hits a number of these focus areas that people have already set. So we'll talk about the goal, and that's, again, what we talked about a second ago, is long term. We're going to show you what we've got, what we've done in the past, and how we think we've solved and met this goal that we're talking about.
Mayor and Council, I really want at this moment to read this in its entirety, because this has driven every decision we've made to this point, and you have represented to the community that you will implement the comprehensive plan. So the goal today is to ensure long-term water system capacity and water quality. So there's two decision points that will be made today: system capacity and water quality for existing customers while accommodating incremental growth and development. And we repeat this multiple times in the presentation as Trey goes through that, but this is the decision point that we work toward to be able to set you up to answer this question to the constituency that elects you, to make sure that you can represent to them that this was the driving force in making the decision we present to you today.
So since I was the chair of the steering committee for the comprehensive plan, I can't see a slide like this and not make a comment. I want to put this in context. When we were visiting about the comprehensive plan, one of the things that we talked about was growth and annexation. And the deal was, do you want to grow? How do you want to grow? And the steering committee and the council at the time, the answer was, you got to give us more data to be able to answer that question, because we were not going to be, we do not want to grow at all, no matter what. We don't want to grow, and we want to grow as fast as we can, regardless of how much it costs. We were looking for that logical middle ground of you grow incrementally as you can afford to provide the services, that you don't shortchange the existing city limits, that you don't ignore the fact that growth was coming. So some people have called that managed growth, people were calling it logical annexation, but that theory was the basis of the comp plan, and that's why you get goals that were written this way. So I just, like I said, since I chaired the steering committee, I can't not remind all of us that's where that came from. And Councilmember Ennis, you were on that committee too, is that how you, okay, thank you. Just wanted to put that in context.
Absolutely. So again, this is what I was talking about. You can see our water CCN here in the blue. You can see we're surrounded by aqua, which is going to be important later on. And you can see the different MUDs and various WCIDs around us. But we're about 7,062 acres in service area. The CCN does not include all of the city of Bastrop city limits as well. There is actually some areas that reserve outside, but they're very limited. Let's talk about the system and how and what it looks like, and this is important. So there's, on the maintenance side, the plan that we've addressed here and the rates that you'll see later on are absolutely here to take care of all of this, but the 70 miles of line, which we're still working on now. But you can see there's 70 miles of water main, there's 7 water wells, 8 high service pumps, 9 system pressure release valves, 10 fiber canisters, filter canisters, turbidity meters, and multiple other fire hydrants and things that just require a lot of maintenance and daily put your hands on there and turning the wrench or greasing or just a lot of stuff to maintain. And I think that's what you really need to take away from this slide, is it serves the people here, but there is a ton of maintenance that goes along with each one of these items. Curtis can spend an entire month probably telling you how many times he has to go back in. Fire hydrant agrees this or change it up. So we have roughly about 3,300 meters, 17% are commercial, 83% are residential, and then some of the residents get water from aqua or a private well. Very few, there are few that still do. If you actually have a private well, it's usually for irrigation or something like that, because we don't allow you to tie into our system that way. Something down on that side. Okay. So what we have done, what Curtis has done, I'm giving the credit here, is actually developed a 10-year maintenance schedule for everything that is plant related. For all the pumps, all the high service pumps we talked about, all the transfer pumps. The tanks, let's talk about a tank and what it takes to just maintain a high service, ground storage tank or an elevated tank. They have to be inspected every year, they have to be painted every 10 years or so. Depending on the elements and things of that outside, excuse me. And then, as part of our plan, when we talk about the water line rehabilitation, which we're actually throwing into an annual maintenance, and it'll be worked into those final numbers, but they're going to be aligned with the recent ECI that we just done. So the pavement condition index, all the streets that are in really bad, poor condition. Curtis is currently now going back and looking at all the water lines, all of the wastewater lines, and we're going to make sure they line up with those streets so that we go through there one time to change the water, repair the road, and that'll all be part of that overall overreaching capital plan. Again, just to touch on this one more time, the goal 2.2, that's exactly our decision-making point, and it's to make sure that we have a long-term water supply. And we think when we get to the end of the water slide here, we've achieved that.
One of the things that
is important is currently in our rate we have today, we have solved this problem. So this is not a decision that you're going to have to decide to fund plant or maintenance. We have gone back and now tightened up the maintenance number that is currently in our rate with the 10-year plan that Curtis has put together both on water and wastewater. And we can achieve that within the maintenance number that's already allocated in the rate, and I think that's significant.
Okay, I have a question. And you may not know the answer, Curtis, it's not a trick question. What is your best estimate of GIS located water lines?
There.
A percentage.
I will tell you that they're done in different formats. That's the problem we have. As far as it's actually been GIS recently, I would say probably 30% at the most.
And then if it's not in the GIS system, as far as the institutional knowledge is what I'm worried about. It's hard to, the question is, how many lines do you not know for sure where they are? Do you feel like you've got a grasp within the city limits, or is there still some mystery land out there?
There's some mystery lines. There's definitely some mystery lines out there, but we are working towards that. Wesley has set us up, and we're going to be working with the new general engineer and going out and doing what do you call it, GIS?
Yeah.
The manholes, block by block. That's part of our going through checking the manholes as well, because that's something that we just had collected in the past. So this is all part of our big package overview of what we're doing. Right now, we don't have the time. We're behind on everything. So right now, what are we doing with TV and wastewater lines?
Okay.
We have to start somewhere, and that's where we chose to start.
The only reason I'm asking is when you've done your maintenance, I would think you were only able to calculate that which you know exists.
That's exactly right. And so it's possible that there will be things out there that we don't know about, but we're counting on them, excuse me, being minimal.
Okay.
And surely because he's got some employees that have worked here 37 years. So they have a scope of magnitude, and the problems over a period of time begin to help you with where things are.
I'm really just trying to, you guys have a feel for it, and that would be a percentage of, nobody can be perfect, and I just didn't know if that's a big number or a small number. That's really not.
No, and it's not to say that all the lines that we know about aren't mapped, because they are. They were just not done in GIS or GPS format. So we have mapped.
Okay.
The problem is it may just be 5 feet off or so. So what we're doing now is going back and cleaning all that up, and that's what Allison's doing, just getting everything digitizing it. It's just going to take time, especially some of the older plan maps that were pre-Curtis and I, and now we're catching up on that. And again, I think what's important to take away is we're going to actually get line items. It's going to be huge as far as a way to save money. So to talk about an alluvial well, out of those 7 that we talked about, 6 are alluvial and 5 are at Fisherman's Park. And what an alluvial well is basically shallow. So it's in the alluvial, bedrock near the river. So, and we're unique. I say we're not unique, but we're unique in the fact that we get most of our water from there. It's great for some kind of, if you have the summer peak or something along those lines, that's fine. But to be reliant on something that's shallow and affected by the river is just not good operational practice. Because whatever the river level is or the rain levels are, is basically what you're stuck with. We'll talk about it a little bit more, but in 2011, when I was on the council then, but the point is we had quite a few issues well shutting down and things of that nature. That's the alluvial wells and the way that they have to be operated. It's also important to remember that you can't really change the water conditions. You're affected by runoff in these alluvial wells, and you're affected by how the changes in the river. Whatever comes from upstream to downstream, that's exactly what you get, and that's what you pump out of the ground. You have to treat. And what's important to remember is you have to make sure your plant is equipped to treat that. So, again, to talk about efficiency levels in the plants, these 5 alluvial wells that we talked about at Fisherman's Park. What's important about this slide is to point out how inefficient it is. And the reason it's inefficient is while we're permitted for 849 acre feet, you can't pump that many gallons per minute. Oh, you're talking about the bottom? Overall?
Yeah, overall,
Yeah.
we're permitted at those 5 wells for 5,455 acre feet.
Correct. And which would result in a little over 5 million gallons a day. But because of the way the wells have to be run for 16 hours a day, because they're alluvial, because you can't draw that much water out, we're restricted by what we can pump. So it's not restricted by what we're permitted for, but restricted by how efficient these wells are. And you can really only pump 2.8 million and you start having trouble.
Well, that is 24 hours a day. So
Correct.
at your 16 hours, we don't even get that.
Correct. So, and we put some practices in place where we actually run the wells. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Because of 2011, there was an iron bacteria growth on the screen. And that happened because as the drawdown was there, you had open space and air was coming through. The iron bacteria would grow there and feed. So then it would clog up the well screens, and then the well would get less efficient. Then you would burn up a pump. You have to replace the pump, the motor, and things like that. And that's what was happening. So they actually went down 2 wells in 2011. Had to immediately go into emergency water restrictions. And and that's what caused us to start a maintenance program that and maybe things a little bit more and make sure they're taken care of. So we're getting it done, but it's not easy to do that. So, and what makes these wells inefficient and expensive is the fact that you can only get 50% of the water you're permitted for, and one here or 50% there at the bottom. That is not a good practice. So that's something that doesn't meet your efficiency focus areas, it doesn't fiscal responsibility. You're still pulling the same amount of electricity if you want or not. It's kind of like twice as hard, maybe actually burn a little more. So what to take away from this slide is how inefficient the wells are. And they have to be ran that way in order to keep them running. You can't take a chance of it going down and run out of water one day. That's just something that we can't do. So we're basically up against the wall, and that's why we're here today to make these decisions. So we'll talk about the plant. You have here to your left is a picture of the low water plant, the filter zones that we talked about, which were added because we're under the influence of the river. When you're considered groundwater under the influence, you have to treat it just like surface water. Well, the problem is this plant wasn't built to treat surface water. It was built to treat groundwater, which is generally something that's not alluvial. It comes right out of the ground. It's very clean. It's so deep that it's been filtered by the earth till it gets to a certain point. Then you just have to add chlorine to something on the side. That's not the case. So we've had some issues with corrosion, and the water being corrosive, we rephrase that. And it's due to a constant pH change. So whatever happens upstream, say from Austin, or some runoff, there's a heavy rain, the river changes, and there's a pH drop, or there's chemicals added. This plant does not have the ability to remove that. It doesn't have the ability to take over the settings. So some of that discolored water that we would get, this plant is not built to treat that. Now these filters will help because we oxidize it, but it doesn't, that's not what these filters are made for. What they're made for is to make sure that there's no heebie-jeebies that we talked about in the past that slip through to make somebody sick. So these are built just as a standard to make sure the ground water under the influence is not. It meets all of the state required levels, but it's not there for aesthetics. And also, because of the filtration and the way that the plant is built, it increases the inefficiency because it's cream flow. So again, we talked about the iron bacteria, how things draw down. You can clog there, but your filters can actually clog because you're oxidizing iron and manganese, and then it clogs the filters, making the pumps more inefficient because you have to pump harder against a clogged filter than you do a clean.
So that bacteria is particular to iron?
That particular one is yes. Yeah, it was an iron bacteria that clogged it up. The filters that I was talking about here are actually just to take out things like cryptosporidium and giardia, which can't be killed by chlorine. So, yeah, heebie-jeebies. And so most of what we do to try to maintain these, because we don't want them to burn up, and like we talked about a little bit before, is we'll actually take a well out, one out of service every year. It costs us about $150,000 to $130,000 to do that. We pull them out, we inject some acid into the ground, clean the overall area that the water is pumped from, recirculate it, put the pump back in, clean everything to keep it running as efficient as we possibly can. But you still only get that 50%. So
how often do you do that?
Once a year. Yeah, and we don't do every one once a year because we can't take all the wells out of service. So this is something that just constantly, this is what we started a few years ago to make sure that we can keep the plant running and that 2011 doesn't happen again. And not to say that it still can't happen. So that's my disclaimer today. It still can happen. Because you can't see what's going on down there until you pull the pump. So what we do is we pull the pump, we do an acid wash, we TV the line, we look and see how the screen conditions are, and then we try to TV the rest of them just to see what shape they're in. If we see one that's worse, then we'll move to that one instead, and we can skip this year and go forward. So again, we talked about the iron bacteria and how it reduces the flow, and that's pretty much the point of this slide, is just to show you the level of maintenance. While it doesn't sound, it looks really easy to do right here on this slide, but for Curtis and his team to bring somebody in, to pull those pumps, to do this acid wash, to get everything clean, we can't turn that well back on until you get a good chlorine treatment, right? So that could take 3 days, it could take 10, depending on the condition of the river. If the river is actually, there's some kind of contaminant that keeps eating up the chlorine, you won't turn that well back on until you've had 3 consecutive times. So it takes quite a bit to get that on, depending on your location. So what we've done with the water resources here at Bob Bryant, which I think is important to talk about as well. We have well H and well I, which are, well H is the alluvial well that's there. That's the 6th one I was talking about. And well I is the one well that we have in the Simsboro. It also has some inefficiencies, and here's why. Because maybe it's on the next slide, but because of the total soft solids in that deep alluvial well, which means it's a little cloudy, right? Kind of white, kind of cloudy, was over the maximum contaminant level the state allows, we had to blend it. So what we did is we blended it with the shallow well. This was a design that was put into place, was to blend it with the alluvial well, and to cut that to meet the state levels. And then it goes through the plant, chlorinated, it's a methane scrubber. I'll talk a little more about that, but what's important about this slide mostly is to point out that you only get a 57% efficiency because those two wells are tied together and they just don't. They require more chemical, they require more runtime, and there's some other issues that we don't have to go into because it's minutia. The main thing that's important to remember is 57% accuracy because you're only allowed to pump a certain amount of alluvial. Yes, sir.
So Simsboro is not alluvial, and you blend it with alluvial.
Correct. So the Simsboro is really very deep, and our well J that we just drilled out at Echo's Ranch is in Simsboro. So that's what you're looking for, something that's deep, a lot more stable.
Gotcha.
Depending on where you're at in the aquifer. So what's important, and I touched on this just a moment ago, was the high dissolved solids and how this plant was never set up to be appropriate treatment. So the plant was set up to be blended, which gets you to that state acceptable level, right? But do we just want to be acceptable, or do we want to be exceptional? And I think with your directions you've been giving us is exceptional. You want to address the aesthetics and you want to address the water quality. And the way that this plant was designed, you just can't do it. Same thing with Willow. So again, I've talked about it was never set up. It really does require some filtration. We're still under some kind of review from the TCEQ, and we test that alluvial well constantly. Is it once a month, once a quarter? Is it once a month? To make sure that we're not under the influence of the groundwater as well. So there could be some changes here. Again, another reason it's inefficient. It has methane, which requires a gigantic scrubber. Burns a lot of power, so it forces a lot of air in there to burn up the methane that's in the Simsboro well high. And it requires to be blended to meet that maximum contaminant level, which is 1,000, by the way. When we blend it, we can meet right at 750 or something like that. It has a high chlorine demand because of the different organics and solids that are in there, and it takes actually double the chlorine to treat 1/3 of the water we can pump at Willow. But Willow can pump 3 times more water. This pumps 3 times less and uses twice the chlorine just because of the maintenance. So what that means is the dirty water columns as you get west of the river, this is where they come from. And it was designed never to stop that from happening. It was designed to meet minimum state standards. It was never designed to stop the complaints. You're always going to have some kind of complaint, but it's never going to stop if what you're pumping out of putting directly into the line is fixed first. You got a whole lot better chance of you putting good quality water in the line and then cleaning them as you go versus putting crap in the line before it's in the out. Crap is probably not the right word,
Not the right
but
word. Not
but putting something that doesn't meet the aesthetically pleasing water that you would like to drink, right? It's supposed to clear.
And I think that really is the comment here. We will always produce water that meets TCEQ quality. But I think what Trey is saying is my perspective of TCE quality and what I expect of my water are two different things. And the challenge that staff has are those costs, because people associate the color and the content in the water and the smell with the problem. You can have all of that and meet TCEQ standards, and we do. So I will, as we take this journey, draw your attention back to the long-term comprehensive plan wants to address the aesthetics piece of the water that currently we don't get to. And that's what Trey's saying.
Now, in a nutshell, what is the well that is pulling back the efficiency of the Bryant pump?
Okay, so well H, which is the shallow alluvial well, and we have well I, which is the deep center. Well I can pump a lot more gallons per minute than well H can keep up with. So I can't reach the maximum pumping level from well I because well H can't keep up to make sure we meet the state standards. There's not enough water to blend it with. That makes any sense.
That's the situation. The process requires the two to be blended, and one is limited by the capacity of the other, and because they have to be blended, you are mandated by the most inefficient of the two.
And the quality is also brought down from H? Or
It's from
from
You're
both,
blending and you're
yeah.
never blending with the same thing because
I got
the
it.
alluvial part's changing all the time.
I'm just looking for the kink in the.
He will show you the kink.
which makes it very hard. Yeah.
Okay.
So we also, again, have iron and manganese, which is something that's, I think it's in every water source that's here in this area. Sorry, I'm moving a little faster. So the Colorado River has numerous sources, different pH levels, which we talked about. Bob Bryant needs to be blended in order to meet those TCEQ requirements. We're just going to go back over what we just talked about.
Bill's answer to Bill's question is number one. When you think about upstream, the farmers discharge into the river, well, if they've got some kind of chemical on their crop, that comes down. The next day, we might be dealing with effluent wastewater from Austin that's treated and put in there. So any given day creates a challenge for which they have to manage. And that was what we're all talking about. While alluvial is not a great way to be your primary source of water, it's usually used as the peak management, the occasional time in the summer when you need it. And so every day is a new day for the water team to meet TCEQ standards and provide you minimum standard water that's safe.
I got you. I was just going to which of those two wells was.
It is H. It's the alluvial that causes the majority of the issues.
Okay, thank you.
Again, a lot of these water sources are challenging is because of the maintenance, like we talked about. So because we have the filters And in the summer, we actually have a peak demand that doubles. So on an average day, we may pump 1.2, 1.3 million gallons a day. And then in summertime, when everybody turns their sprinklers on, we pump 2.6 million. So when that happens, that makes it even more inefficient. They're running constantly. We have to babysit them a little bit more, and you have to change the filters on constantly because of the higher flow. Because there's so much more water running through, they clog quicker. That means more water occurs in the skies. And it can actually happen. We can look at them one day and they're perfect, and the next, a big chunk of manganese and iron was oxidized and clogged the filter, and they got to come back in on Saturday and fix it. So it's a lot of worry and a lot of call outs and things of that nature. And with what we have, what's important about this slide is to point out, since there's really no options for improvement in either one of those locations. It's just not going to happen. We're going to have to do something to make sure that this is fixed. So with our current resources combined, again, we talked about pumping for the 16 hours a day. We're just going back over how inefficient they are. Because we were permitted for this much larger amount, there if you look, at the 7 combined, Bob, Ryan, and below, sorry, you can see we actually are permitted for 7.8 million gallons a day. So that's huge, that's epic, that's a lot of people that really builds Bastrop out. But the problem is with the wells and the plants that you have now, they're so inefficient you can never pump more than the 2.6 to 2.8. And it gets really scary about 2.8. Birds can't sleep at night. Or in the summer when we're pumping 2.8 million. Because it's not a matter of when a pump's going to burn. It's not a matter of if a pump's going to burn, it's just when in the summer. There's always one that burns up. It's usually on a Sunday or a holiday weekend. So we'll talk about that when we get into purchasing one-on-one. And just for everybody's knowledge, SUE count is based on 0.6 gallons per connection. So while that's important, when you have a 3/4 inch meter that goes to each one home, that's one SUE. And then you're bound by that gallons a minute you can pump. So that 2.6 million gallons a day is broken into gallons per minute, and that's how many homes you can have overall. So again, the difference from 7.8 here to this is epic. 5.2 million gallons that you thought you had, but you can't pump because it's inefficient.
How many SUVs is it?
I'd have to do some math. That's a trick question.
The inefficiency, let me get trying. The inefficiency for folks watching this from home is the cost of the water. Y'all know that we recently purchased 6,000 acre feet of water for about $3 million. So you've got 7,000 acre feet sitting here that you pay real money for, and you can only use $2.6 million of that investment set a different way. So there's inefficiency in the investment of the asset that you can't even access because of the process that you use to get to that. And that's what's got to change. We don't have the money to have that kind of resource sitting there and us not be able to access it.
So at 2,716, it's 4,500. So let's talk about the England well that we purchased. That was for $800,000. We still owe $420. The annual payments are made by the BEDC. The water resources in the Simsboro, we've actually got some quotes on doing a pump test, and it'd be $150,000 to do a pump test and leave a casing in place. And then what we also did was talk to the groundwater. We talked to multiple sources, right? So we've met several engineers, more than just HDR. We've sat around the table. This is your only 5-hour meeting. We've had about 2 dozen of these to talk about this. And what gives this value is the fact that in our conversations with the groundwater district, we think we can use the groundwater once this pump test is performed, and we check it one more time, and they find that there's 1,300 acre feet there, or somewhere along those lines. You can aggregate that and use it as excess range. That's what makes this valuable, because you own the groundwater rights underneath it. While the property may be in an area that's got some toad around it or got some environmental challenges, what makes it important is if you can aggregate that water and take it out of the location, that makes this a win. So right now the city owns 3,000 acre feet of excess ranch. We're permitted for 2,000 acre feet. and that's at a rate of 1,500 gallons a minute. Well J has been drilled. What we're gonna do for final construction is we're really waiting to decide after this meeting what kind of pump size we're gonna have, because this is gonna determine the treatment and the way that people wanna go. We've also executed another purchasing agreement. We have not executed the purchase. We've executed the purchase agreement, but not finalized the sales document for the additional 3,000 square feet, which, by the way, was an epic thank you, council, mayor. This right here will save the day. You don't know how important those actions that you took in that executive session to make this decision were. So you have technically nearly met this goal 2.2, but you've done everything you can to help us to make that happen. So if you want to give a round of applause, Gay Council, this was actually a great decision. So thank you very much. So when we consolidate that water to one facility, and we can aggregate, like we just discussed, if we can aggregate that Ingram well, we can aggregate what we have at Bob Bryant, which is in the Simsboro, the same as Well J, that would give you 7,613 acre feet, or 6.8 million gallons a day, which is, I said 2.6, so that gives us that 30 to 50 year long term. This is how you meet that goal. It all depends on development. If homes start moving in quick, large businesses start moving in, that time could diminish, but I think it's safe to say you've got a good 30 to 50 year range. You've absolutely accomplished that goal in the comprehensive plan, which is what everybody's, there's lots of fingerprints on it. Everybody in the city came in on it, so it was really good planning. Now we're getting there, and this is how we're going to take it the rest of the way. We've also, as of Wednesday night, we're granted a 2-year extension. We went ahead and submitted early. I sat down in my conversation with Jim and said, hey, can we do a 24-month extension on the well at Well J? He said, before you start pumping water? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, sure. I didn't think you would ask for it before you even started pumping water. So, but we just want to make sure we have lots of time to make the right decision. So what we've done is give ourselves 48 months to make all these decisions and put everything in place. And then Bob Bryant, again, is permitted with the 1,600 acre feet, so that's something we would aggregate in a big lump sum amount. Yes, sir.
Why don't, just because I don't want to leave any stone unturned, why do we need an extension?
With the reason that we asked for the extension, well, we could probably rush this in. We wanted to make sure we're giving the right treatment options that we're fixing to come up to and talk about, when HGR is going to talk about, but it gives us 48 months to make good decisions versus 24.
If all we were proposing to do is to put a pump at Well J, 24 months is fine. But when you start talking about a centralized plant, designing it, passing rates for it, and constructing, that's a 4-year process. And so when we realized that that's where we're going and that's what we're going to ask you to do, some of the decisions in the past, my perception, because I was not here, were driven by permit dates. We got to get it in, the permit's going to expire. We got to get it in, the permit's going to expire. Well, we want to take that off the table because the decision you make today, this community needs to live with for the next 30 to 50 years. And it needs to be right. So in order to facilitate this conversation, we went ahead and asked for the extension. So we know today we have 48 months from November of 2017 to make this happen. Now, we could get an extension if we're close, but what that did was take the pressure off. We've got time to be methodical and get it right. It's just our future.
So bottom line is the water district approves our plans for our plant, and et cetera, et cetera.
What they do is they approve the amount of water we can pump and they permit that amount. So we have a permit now for 2,000 acre feet at 1,500 gallons a minute, and we can start pumping that as soon as we get the infrastructure in. But because we think it's important to make sure we're making all the right decisions, we just went ahead and asked for an extension, and it may absolutely not take 48 months. But we wanted to have 48 months just so there was no pressure.
I just wanted to close that loop.
No, that's perfect. Great question. So what's important to remember is the peak summer demand is very close to our maximum peak daily value, which we talked about. Everything doubles, everybody turns their sprinklers on, wants their grass to be green. So that's a challenge with the well business. We did purchase the 6,000 acre feet, which is great. That's the game changer. Again, yay council. Everybody reach over, pat yourself on the back. It's actually a great decision. It's huge. What you've done is secure the city's future, and that's exactly what you're elected to do. So We also own 1,600 acre feet in Simsboro under Bob Bryant, and the combined availability of all of that water together and the pumping capacity is 6.8 million. So what we've done, again, to wrap this up, is ensure these long-term water goals and that capacity and the long-standing stability of the city. And that's truly what, again, we're all here to do. What's important, again, is to talk about the Ingram well. While it's a good source, now it's important. In our discussions with the groundwater district, he said, again, you're asking a question that nobody's ever asked me before, but yes, you could probably aggregate the water from here before you put the well in. So with all of our rights to be consolidated to one permit, it'll be done at Well J, giving you one more big, efficient plant, so there's not operators running to 4 different locations all over the city. Everybody's in one spot, everybody's doing their job, all the pumps and the maintenance that we talked about earlier. Absolutely, is all in one spot, except at your pump stations, of course. But anything that's plant related would be in one spot, and that makes them much more efficient.
Well, there will need to be a second well drilled at Excess Ranch in order to meet the water demand, but it's not quite there.
Yes, so exactly, we'll move to that. If we were to build at Excess Ranch, there'll be multiple wells that are drilled at Excess Ranch. But what you'll build is one water plant. So what you'll do is you'll end up adding a well field. So for instance, we put in Well J, what you'll end up with one is next to it, or just a little farther away so that they don't influence each other and they're pumping the cone of influence. And you'll have several out there. You may end up with 4 eventually to make sure you have enough water to produce as long as you need to. Each one of those are permitted, but what we would do right away is make sure we have enough there to reach our current demand and build this plant out for that 30-year life. So we got one plant, multiple wells that feed that plant, and they run through a type of treatment that gives you the good aesthetic, gives you the good quality that you're looking for, and you meet all the state standards.
So in this moment, the comment that the mayor made about accommodating incremental growth, this absolutely does that. As you grow, you add a well. So you will add a well that will create enough capacity for today's demand and some growth. When you then see you're growing beyond that, you add a well, and this plant will be built to deliver 5+ million gallons. But each well will be added to ultimately get to that 5 million. We'll be talking about that. HDR is going to walk us through that. But that's the smart investment in this. You're going to build a mothership that handles ultimate build out, but then you'll add the water when you need it. So that was one of the reasons the mayor spent time explaining to you about this has to be incremental. So instead of adding a plant every time we grow, we have a centralized plant. We'll just add access to water as we grow.
That's exactly right. Again, another thing that will make it more efficient, because once you put that second well in, you can reach the gallons per minute that are needed to serve the city. You can actually turn off those inefficient facilities that we talked about. So when you turn off Bob Bryant and you turn off Willow, we think the savings will be, you may see some increase, but I think it's going to be pretty negligible, and that will go away. It just has to be done in steps. Eventually, you're just spending exactly the same amount of money that you were. You've got one really good, efficient plant that you can grow with, which is not the case at the moment. So we need to evaluate, here's the things that we need to continue to do. We need to evaluate the treatment options for the consolidated water plant in one location, which is what HDR is going to talk about. We need to secure additional water capacity, provide time to make the appropriate long-term decisions, which you've already done when you purchased the acre feet. We've got some other...
Just for you to get to the next slide and the answers to that.
So let's just go to the next slide.
There we go.
So again, we need to evaluate. We hired HDR to take care of that. We need to secure the additional water supply. We've had multiple conversations with Aqua. Sorry, I didn't know we were all that. And we're going to discuss that this afternoon in discussion 3. So that stopgap that we were talking about is absolutely coming up. And that'll take place before the construction of Well J is completed. And how long will it take to realistically design and build a consolidated water treatment facility? We've developed a schedule, and we're estimating somewhere around 2021 for the deadline of internal capacity, and we're going to talk about that in session 4.
Mayor and council, as we conclude the resource piece of this and turn this over to HDR, just to put this into perspective, these are the questions, whether or not these questions have to be answered before we add a pump at Well J. Because if we're not going to consolidate the plant, then that is a different direction for Trey to take Well J. So evaluating the treatment options impacts Well J, because whether or not we consolidate, we still need to know how to treat the water coming out of Well J. We need to bridge that peak demand, because what drove the decision for council to buy that 6,000 acre feet is we're at that 2.8 million gallon per day demand today. And we need 4 more years. So we wanted to bridge that. So again, y'all make the right decision, not driven by some extenuating circumstance that has urgency that will cause you to not make the right decision. So these are decisions that we're going to talk about today, so that when y'all are asked to make a decision, we've tried to cover every contingency out there so you have time to do it right. If it's driven by a permit, we've got the permit extended. If it's driven by the fact we can't produce enough water, we've covered where we're going to get the water. So at the end of the day, y'all are in a position to make the right choice, not this is the best we could do with the time that we have. We want to get out of that. Does that make sense?
Yes, but my question is, if you're done by 2021, when did you start?
Today.
Yes, that's now, yes. Sorry.
So we can't move forward on resolving any of this until today. And y'all are going to make decisions that then put a series of events into motion so that we can be where we need to be in 2021. And as we walk through today, you'll understand timelines and all of that. But just know that we've bridged the issues between now and 2021 to give y'all time to make a decision and for us to actually implement it and turn that system on. So, any questions at this point? This was just intended to give you some perspective to know what to do with HDR's presentation. All right. Having none, why don't you introduce HDR while I get their slide pulled up?
Sure. So we have Mr. Greg Pearson, I believe, that's going to give the water portion of this. We've got, I'm sorry, Stan Williams and James DeWire with HDR, and I saw Shay a minute ago, but I don't know where she went. They're here to help us out. Mr. Pearson, I'm going to hand you this. Give me the clicker. Yes, sir, right. And he will talk about all the things that he's went through and what he discovered as far as treatment and the water and what it looked like at its range.
Okay. Can you all hear me? Okay, very good. Well, thanks for having us. My name is Greg Pearson. I've been with HDR 29 years. 28 of those years up in Washington State, so I'm fairly new to Texas. We have a lot of groundwater up in Washington too, and a lot of iron and manganese. So Trey had asked us to do a concept level look at the probable treatment requirements for the well field at Excess Ranch site, with the intent of coming up with a concept level, planning level cost estimate or range for y'all to work from. Okay, won't go through this again, but of course Well J is their new production well. There's a second well called TW2, as we understand it, that will be basically a monitoring well in the interim and could become a production well down the road, as well as other wells. We were asked to look at the maximum production rate initially for this cost evaluation of 2.7 million gallons per day.
The reason, council, that they didn't look at the 5.7 million that we need is when we hired HDR, y'all had not purchased the 6,000 acre feet. And so as we took this journey, that's how we got to where we needed to be. So toward the end, he'll address it, but this has been an evolution. And so we started in one place, figured out we had an aha moment, and this is adaptable.
Okay, water quality. You have good water at this aquifer. There's several parameters listed. I won't go through all those, but of course the important ones are iron and manganese. They're a pair. It's very common. They always come together, naturally occurring in aquifer formations. They are not health-related issues, as I'm sure you know. They're aesthetic parameters, but they are regulated from that standpoint by a so-called secondary maximum contaminant level. For iron, that level is 0.3 milligrams per liter. Fairly small, and for manganese it's even less, it's 0.05 milligrams per liter. These are levels that above which you will almost always get aesthetic problems in a distribution system, especially once it's chlorinated and or plumbing fixtures in your homes and businesses. So well J is total iron on the order of 4 times the SMCL. And manganese a little bit less. We also had some data from the second well. Iron appears to be a little lower, but still above. And manganese, this indicates you could have varying levels of manganese in this well field that you're going to need to treat. Yes, sir.
Are they pretty close to each other, these two wells?
I don't know exactly how close.
They're with,
James Water, pretty much bookend. Great question. So test well 2 is on the north end of your field, and well J is on the south. So those represent bookends. And as Greg said, there's variability, but it's not like the river variability with time. This is variability with space. So once we define a well site, that iron and manganese is going to be very constant, very predictable for decades. So yeah, it's just variability within the aquifer.
And is it just based on geological formation?
It is. It
Okay.
is. And when we're talking these are parts per million. So yeah, they're variable, but yeah, very good quality.
Okay, thank you.
and that test well 2 was actually drilled when you made the original decision about that 3,000 acre field. So that's the test well that was drilled, pump tested. They got an idea of what they could purchase at 6,000 overall. Then they bought the 3,000. Then we moved south to look for better quality water or just another area. Actually, we moved south to make sure we could be closer. We'll make it as cheap as possible to get close and put brand water into town. So we went to the south end of the field. There was some formation issues, things like that, but go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so you've already mentioned, of course, it'd be a consolidated treatment facility for the groundwater at this site. So talk a little bit about the treatment methods without going too far. Basically, there's 2 parts to groundwater treatment. You need to provide some sort of oxidation to chemically make the iron and manganese come out of solution into a solid form that can then be filtered out. If you don't provide filtration after the oxidation, those metals and oxides will go downstream, and you'll all see them be reddish or blackish, depending on where it ends up. So for oxidation, aeration is common, but that's really only effective for iron only. I'll touch on that in a minute. But you can use a variety of other common oxidant chemicals, permanganate, sodium or potassium permanganate, chlorine, which you already use, and ozone. Trey asked us to look at ozone as a potential option here. Filtration, there's various media you can use, but it's not too important to the discussion here, but it's well-established technology The media is robust. It will last a long time if it's well taken care of. So that's just some considerations there. There's also something called membrane filtration. That's a different animal. That's more applicable to surface waters and microbial contaminants. It's not looked at here. Just a little photo of manganese dioxide, which is commonly used to coat the media, and it makes it more effective for manganese removal in particular.
Mayor and council, one of the things I want to preface this conversation with is these guys are going to talk treatment. My expectation was we were buying a solid, middle-of-the-road technology like a good Ford that will last. We're not going to be trailblazers. We're not going to be pioneers. We're not testing some treatment that we think might work. We want proven technology that lasts forever, rock solid, just good, solid water treatment expectations. So as he goes through this and makes that recommendation, understand that we've already defined the parameters beyond the treatment on the expectation of the outcome. We're tired of trying to make what we shouldn't have done work. So they're bringing us a solution that's works, and has a history of working for years and years, and is a rock solid way to do business. And I think that's important as you listen to what he's saying is we're getting out of the, well, let's experiment business because we're saving money. Or minimum, that's right.
Okay, real quickly, there are some differences in treatment between iron and manganese. Again, it's not real important, this discussion. Suffice it to say that iron is easier to oxidize and remove relative to manganese. Manganese is a little bit more stubborn, takes a little bit longer to oxidize. It tends to want to oxidize actually on the surface of the media more than in solution. It also, sometimes, you may have to push up your pH for treatment for more effective removal. So that can add a chemical. Just some photos here. Ozone. It's an unstable form of oxygen that you create with electrical current. So you need a machine to make ozone. Just a couple photos of ozone generators that are approximately the size you would need if you were to treat this water with ozone. Filter types, gravity filters. This first slide, there's all forms of gravity filters. For this application, what we looked at least initially, is pre-engineered, modular, steel tankage filters. You can add as many of these as needed as you build out. These are very commonly used. They're used all over Texas for groundwater and surface water treatment. The other option with filters are pressure filters. Same process inside the filter itself, but pressure filters remain under pressure. They're a pressure vessel, so they're not. You don't break head of with the water and push it, drop it through the filter under gravity, but you keep it under pressure. So, any questions here? We'll just keep moving. We looked at 4 options. The first option would be to use pump from the well, add your oxidant chemical. Here I've indicated permanganate. Chlorine may work just fine, and hopefully that's the case. But permanganate is very, very commonly used. It's a little bit more effective for manganese treatment, but chlorine can work as well too. Option 1 then would have gravity filters. We envisioned 2 units initially. Gravity filters. Then after filtration, because you don't have enough pressure to maybe move the water where you need it, either to ground storage or into your distribution system, we assume there would be some sort of pumping station on the back end of this. Option 2 is the same thing with pressure filters. The big difference here is because the system is under pressure, We're assuming that the well pump would provide enough pressure to move all the treated water to where you need it on the back end. So the big difference is no pumps, no booster pumps in the back end. Third option considers ozone for oxidation. So with the gravity filters, you'd apply the ozone. Ozone needs typically some sort of baffling chamber to contact the ozone with the water ahead of the filters, and then because these are gravity filters, pumped to the system. The fourth option is same thing. Now with pressure filters, the ozone would contact in a little larger pipe. That pipe is under pressure, of course. It's a pressure system. And then out. Any questions on that?
Yes, sir. How do you decide, what is the deciding factor?
Well, yeah, I think that's a good lead-in to
okay.
to this. This again, a little bit of a busy slide. This is from the little tech memo that was prepared. The four options are shown left to right. There are various parameters there on the left, cost components. I would point out that the major differences between the four options are some differences in treatment equipment costs, not very great, but the ozone options we assume would have a little higher equipment costs because of the ozone generator. The other differences in costs are a booster pumping system. If you have a gravity filter system, you're going to need some additional pumping that you wouldn't have with the pressure system. Assumed at this level that the equipment would be in some sort of building. It doesn't have to be. There's some potential savings there, but at this point we're a little conservative and said you'll enclose this equipment. Of course, costs associated with electrical, instrumentation controls, SCADA, and needless to say, site work, connecting piping in the yard, etc. We added contractors' costs and profit. So the third line from the bottom is the raw concept level numbers. Now, for construction costs, they range from on the order of 6.6 to 8.1 million. Because this is concept level, we've then added a 30% markup, if you will, on that. It's for undefined scope. This is early on. There's many unknowns that would need to be defined better. As projects are developed, as you know, this allowance for undefined scope shrinks as you know more. Okay. So the bottom lines here for this evaluation, we're in the order of, for option 2, 8.6 million is the relatively lower cost option to option 3, which is about 10.5. Okay.
Are you going to address life cycle cost?
Well, we didn't go through all the life cycle costs. We did develop O&M costs, which are the next slide. We had to make some pretty broad assumptions at this point because O&M can really be dependent on what it is you have. However, for O&M, and I don't think this is an updated slide, but there's not a great deal of difference on O&M costs. This is today's dollars. First year, 1 year operation. It's on the order of $160,000 to $280,000 a year, conservative. Okay. So how that plays out over a 20-year life cycle, I don't have those numbers today. So I wouldn't do that.
Can you hear me, Colin? No? Can you hear me now? Yes.
To put this into perspective, remember when Trace said that we do one acid wash a year? and it's between $135,000 and $150,000. That's just the acid wash. None of the, I mean, all of those are in the neighborhood and they're intended to be contained as total maintenance cost. So this is to begin to give you a scope of magnitude of the inefficiency of the current system that we're running. So when you look at the O&M cost over the life cycle of the 30-year plant and what the construction cost is, we have the scope of magnitude we'll deal with in the next section when we start talking about rates and how this looks. But to the extent we could take that and make decisions today, scope of magnitude for y'all to make decisions from, we have done that. But a final decision will come when the actual design of the plant has been determined and before you approve a design and pass rates, you'll have that number. But today we've given it the best we have with what we have to work with because we're doing a lot of speculation today.
Okay. And, well, you know, and I see the operational maintenance cost differences here, but is there a life expectancy difference in these various systems that you have here that will say, hey, yeah, this is good. We can maintain it over 30 years at these numbers, but option B is going to crater in 15 years and you're going to have to spend millions of dollars to replace it or something?
That's an excellent question. No, at this level, and because, as Linda said, we're not reinventing wheels or on cutting edges here, tried and true, these are equivalent options in terms of longevity and level of maintenance. Your biggest O&M costs typically are pumping energy costs and labor. So to the extent that you can optimize pumping, and we haven't really had an opportunity to look at the hydraulics in detail for this application yet, but where you can minimize pumping or optimize it, as well as the labor effort, those are the two biggest impacts. Chemicals, not so much. Ozone generation, if you want ozone, not a big thing. It's robust equipment, whether it's pressure or steel gravity tanks, filters, they'll last a long time if they're taken care of, long time.
Does the output change if you're using permanganate as opposed to ozone? Is there additional things that are pushing down the line
So yeah, that's exactly right. So this, like, can you go back one slide? What we did is give you an option to make a decision here. We have permanganate, you know, there's going to be chlorine as well, and you have ozone. Ozone is the most aggressive oxidant there is. It eradicates anything in the water, everything you can think of, it gets rid of it. Permanganate is absolutely a standard that everybody uses for water treatment. It has its own set of options, its own set of problems. What can happen is if there's a pH change in the water, it goes in the system, your water can turn purple, things like that. So what I'm giving you is an option on the low end and on the high end, and what's important to you? Is it aesthetics and meeting those state standards we've been talking about, or is it just meeting those state standards? Now, I will tell you, with properly treated permanganate, you have a better quality water than you have now, but we've given you the really safe option, and then somewhere in between. So, which is better than you have now, but it's not the epic, exactly what I think you're thinking when you think clear and clean, crystal clear water. And I also think it's important to point out just the difference of about 800,000 to 900,000, sorry.
Let's go to the next slide, because I'm on the same path that Gary is. So the O&M, if you look at the O&M labor, it looks like ozone is what's driving the difference. Is that correct? Because I kind of expected the pressure or not pressure to have a little bit of...
Well, it does. Ozone and the gravity is affecting it as well. Oh, this is affecting the O&M cost, you're right. But the cost in construction is gravity versus pressure, because you only need one pump versus another set of pumps. But, yeah.
We at a first blush assumption in terms to address your question on the comment on ozone. Yeah, ozone. You have this machine, So we presume that over the life cycle of that machine, it's going to require a little more maintenance relative to a liquid chemical feed system like chlorine or permanganate. Okay. Not a great deal of cost, but there is a difference. So, yeah.
The important thing on the choices here are these. Trey had a number of conversations with HDR. These are 4 choices of a lot of conversations, and we're not asking you to make a final decision today. Again, we're talking about what is the end goal. Are y'all truly trying or willing to eradicate the aesthetic issues so that we have consistent water and we know we can provide that aesthetic for a long time? If that's the case, ozone is the option. If you're looking for something that is better than what we've got, but not 100%, then your permanganese is the choice. The reason that we looked at this goes back to exactly what I said, and that is the current maintenance cost we're paying today for Bob Bryant and for Willow. They far cost way more than any of these options here. So for a long-term operational and maintenance perspective for operating a plant, any of these are way better than what you're currently doing. So we're only going to improve in the cost of maintaining a system to produce water. So we felt pretty safe in giving you this region of margin because we're only going to reduce the current cost.
Yeah, to me, it looks like the incremental cost over the lifetime of the system of doing the ozone is not that great.
Exactly.
You know, we're looking at a 30-year lifespan. You're going to spend more to install it, but it looks like the maintenance isn't a whole lot more. If you factor in what we're already spending right now for a fraction of the amount of water, we're buying water way cheaper than we have been. We can put out a quality that's way better than what we have been. We'll spend a little bit more up front. You amortize that over 30 years, and it's just negligible. And the maintenance really makes the whole thing worthwhile.
And I think it's a foregone conclusion, Trey and Curtis, that although we don't have ozone treatment now, so we don't have people on our staff that are currently doing ozone treatment, you have a long time to get them certified and get them up to speed so that you're not driving up your maintenance costs. Is that a correct assumption that I'm making?
So I have a question. Because there's just so much changing so quickly, my question would be, are there anticipated issues that are going to come about with water and its purity and cleaning? And, you know, it just seems like there might be some.
Yes,
So I guess my question is wouldn't the ozone be something that could kind of anticipate that, whereas the other is do you understand my question?
yes, absolutely. This gives you more flexibility in this end again, because if there is a significant change, or you decided to get another water source and blend it, or something along that nature, that ozone is going to do the job, and we're going to have less issues than we would with the permanganate.
So back to Linda's example, it's a good solid Ford, but it has some standard options. So
Yes.
that it's
Do you want cruise control, or do you want to just,
So I guess, what do you and Trey, are y'all leaning towards the ozone, it sounds like?
Yes, ma'am. And part of the conversation that we had before you were able to make the meeting is right now we don't have any options given the 2 treatment sources that we have. It comes with a lot of uncertainty and high cost to treat and maintain what we have. We're looking at a centralized plant that can anticipate conditions moving over this 30-year life. Any changes in TCEQ, ozone is going to be that rock solid, take care of it. And as you can see, long term, it's a nice middle of the road, so why wouldn't you do that? Particularly when we're trying to anticipate something today we don't know is a problem 20 or 30 years from now. But this is an industry standard And it's proven technology, and if we're gonna make the investment at this point in time, why not we just get it right? And that really was what we were providing to you. So at this point in time, that concludes HDR's presentation on water. Are there any questions for them at this point in time?
Is the pressure versus the gravity, as far as shooting it down the line, is there one recommendation you have on that one?
All other factors equal, if you don't have to repump, that's the better way to go. That said, for this application, we don't know all the options for moving the treated water into your system, and that there could be some differences there. So, but all other factors equal, if you don't have to break head from your well, you can pump it, get it in your system with that pumping head provided by the well only. It's typically more efficient. Not always, but typically.
Thank you.
So at this point in time, let's talk about scope of magnitude. And this is a caveat of scope of magnitude with an awful lot of variables. So what's not included in HDR's cost projections is adding a second well. A second well is needed so that we can turn Willow and Blue Bobbright off and finally have a system that works. So what's not included in the cost that you've seen is about $1.2 million to drill that needed well. Current rates that happen right now with impact fees that we get to pay for upcoming growth are currently paying for the 16-inch water line across the Colorado, and there is enough money in our rate schedule today with the money that we have in fund balance above required. We can design the centralized water plant, which is about an 18-month to 2-year process, without having to sell any debt. So we can get to an answer with the money that we have. We have developed a 10-year water system maintenance plan based on the 10-year replacement schedule that Curtis has put together. That has allowed us to tighten up how much of the maintenance that's built into this rate against what we know we now need. When the rates were built, it was a plug figure. Staff did the best they could with what they thought they would need, and now we're able to better answer that question. We are growing a little faster than we projected when we established impact fees. So what that means is there's going to be some additional impact fees currently not calculated and accounted for in our rates that could offset the cost. We will design a plant, and at that point in time, what you heard Greg say is there's a lot of play because this is nothing more than a concept plan. So once the plant's actually engineered and we get an estimate or an opinion of probable cost, now we can begin to plug those costs into a model and better tell what it's going to cost. We have already seen this morning with just one number, and that is the acid wash required to maintain the pumps at Willow, that there is significant money to be saved with taking the two plants offline and having a more efficient production cost. So we currently only have 2 water rate classes, commercial and residential. That is not the most efficient way to establish water rates. What you want is each class paying the appropriate cost for the consumption and the challenge they put on the system. So we need to establish some additional rate classes. And so they could be residential, sprinklers, commercial, and multifamily. And so what that will do is better generate revenue according to usage, because now folks get some winter averaging the way we manage our rates that shouldn't get that. So what our rate consultant, who has been extremely politically correct, has just casually said to Tracy, you know, I don't normally see that when I set rates. Very nice. So next year, we need to address those policy changes so that we can adopt industry standards relative to rate setting. Because we're now having 30-year capital investments that we need to establish our growth patterns appropriately. What we also need to do is take the journey on establishing fees. So as you can tell, there's a lot of play in that. So our best guess today, our worst case scenario for being able to significantly improve our water delivery, the maintenance cost associated with that is that there will be a nominal rate increase. Tracy and I really believe there won't be any rate increase. That alone should tell you how inefficient our system is, that we can invest in a $10 million plant. We can put ozone filtration in and hugely improve the aesthetics for what we're paying today.
Is it one of the things you talked about was that we don't have in our budget right now the cost for a second well, which would provide some redundancy for the first well. Is it possible to continue to keep Willow Street there as a redundant source, that and maybe Aquawater to be our redundancy, so we wouldn't have to drill the second well?
When you amortize $1.2 million over 20 years, it's $50,000 a year. You divide that by 12 months in the rate class, it's cheaper to put the well in than it is to buy water from Aqua or keep either of them on. And so when you look at that 1.2 million and you amortize it over 20 years and the customers we have now that we know will only grow, it's nominal. It's the nominal rate increase.
And this says that it's not in the previous numbers. I don't think she was saying it's not somehow covered in the budget.
It will be calculated in the rate, but $1.2 million over 30 years, when you're talking the resources of our system, what's the question? Are you disagreeing with this?
No. He was talking about Willow, and I was just reminding Trey, we did talk about continuing to use the storage at Willow.
Yes.
Just not the pumps, just not the wells.
So, but it's the pumping of Willow that's the expensive process. So when we get to the future decisions this afternoon, we'll talk about the transition. So we're going to turn Willow off as pump, but we're going to use that resource as storage. So we're going to the extent we can recycle what we have when it makes sense, we will. But the most expensive element of Willow is producing the water. This seems to be a no-brainer, and we did this purposely first because the next one's not going to be a no-brainer. But are there any questions or concerns? Because in summary, what we're going to do is centralize our plant, so that will allow us to grow with a minimal amount of staff. When you start getting multiple locations, Curtis has to hire more people. There's more miles you have to cover, more permits you have to maintain. And it just becomes a maintenance challenge. We can manage it, but it's just money. What this does is allow us to centralize the water, treat for aesthetics, and do it as efficiently as we believe possible in 2018, given the conditions that we know.
So my question, given an update of the entire system, so you do both locations, what kind of timeline? I mean, let's say we've made a decision.
We're going to get to that in session 4.
we'll get to considerations of rate later on.
Rate will not come until probably the adoption of fiscal year 2020 in 2019. So now, at the conclusion of today, y'all have given us some direction. We can now hire a water system engineer firm. Let me say this in a different way. We can hire an engineering firm that specializes in the development of a water treatment plant. We now have parameters to give them to establish a project scope. So once they work through the process and evaluate current conditions, some of the process may change, but y'all will be a part of that journey. Establishing rates to then pay for the construction of this plant will occur at the adoption of the budget in 2019, so 18 months out, so that we can address some of these variables today that we don't know. So that when you have to pull the trigger, you have to commit because there's no turning back. We've got the best information we can at that point in time, but we can't get there without y'all making some decisions like we're asking you to do today. Okay, if that's the case, it is 10 o'clock, we're on schedule, and we appreciate that your mental capacity is commensurate with your backside. We're gonna give you 15 minutes to kind of walk around, because the next one is gonna be the shock and awe, so I'll just prepare you. Mayor and Council, the next presentation is going to be by Curtis Hancock, our Assistant Public Works Director. Just for purposes of folks that don't know Curtis, Curtis was the wastewater superintendent prior to being promoted to Assistant Director of Public Works. So nobody understands this system better than Curtis. I will say this just to give you some perspective of how much I really appreciate and respect Curtis. When I was a new city manager in the first 2 weeks, I went around to each department and met with the supervisor or the director, and I have a series of questions that I always ask, whether I'm serving permanent or interim, to begin to understand issues, how well things are running, so that I can prioritize operationally where I need to spend my time the most. The two Curtises, Hancock and Irwin, were the only two that I asked questions that gave me an answer to everything I asked when I asked it. And not only could answer the question, but could tell me why that was the answer. And so I have always had tremendous respect for Curtis. And I think when you get through hearing the issues he has to deal with and the lack of options we have, and you hear HDR's presentation, this is going to be one of those gulp moments. We're not going to like the answer, but I'll tell you how it ends. We have no choice. It is what it is. And so with that perspective, I'm going to turn it over to Curtis to take you on that same journey of operationally, what are we looking at? What choices do we have? And what do we have to do to be able to meet not only the comprehensive plan's request, but our fundamental purpose, which is to flush toilets and have running water. And so flushing the toilets really is where we start every day. And that's, at the end of the day, where we've got to talk about is our ability to flush those toilets. Oh, quick, I'm sorry.
Well, I'm definitely not a public speaker, so y'all bear with me, but I do want to thank y'all for taking the time to spend your Saturday to learn about our problem. So,
Colin, is he on?
might want to go to the
Let's be
mic.
sure to come in right. I'll just go to the microphone. Better? But I've been in Bastrop a long time too, so the community does mean a lot to me.
You're gonna have to go to the mic.
This better?
That's better.
All right.
There you go.
As in the first area, we're looking at our strategies and what we're gonna do with the wastewater, with the plan, and reviewing the CCN, which y'all know our CCN is 3 times larger in wastewater than it is water. Understanding that the TCQ is our driving force of how, and what we do. Reviewing all of the permits with TCQ with plant designs for number 3, which we've had for numerous years and had re-upped and know that that's not the option that we want to go anymore. Vision statement, which we've all heard many times, but there's a few things that are really important, and it is how unique our environment is. Because Bastrop is changing, and we have to change with it, or otherwise we're going to have to shut the doors and stop. Mission statement, which is very true. It drives towards a lot of things, but achieving our vision. Our vision is where we're going. Y'all set the rules of where we're going, and that's these factors right here. Y'all set them out, and we're giving y'all, trying to follow y'all's pattern and to keep up with y'all.
Mayor and council, I'm going to address these two. I really wish we had had the second one for water, but I absolutely love these 2 goals. Because one is we have to expand the wastewater collection and treatment in a cost-effective manner. What Curtis is going to talk to you about with the TCEQ requirements is we're now to a point, given our growth, we've got to start addressing how we're going to expand our wastewater collection. But goal number 5 drives how we do that, and that is to enhance the wastewater system efficiency. And there are 2 elements to that. One is the maintenance. Curtis is going to address to that. But the efficiency is reliability, redundancy, and our ability to be sure toilets flush today, tomorrow, next week, and next year. And there's some challenges with both of those. So this is a 2-pronged approach. The wastewater collection and then how we maintain the system. And I think when he gets through with this, you'll see how we can resolve both of these into one answer and do both of them correctly.
This is just a map showing our CCN. You can see just how large it is. And y'all can remember back that the water is basically the city limits. We have 2 wastewater treatment plants here. One of them is a 0.104 and the other one is a 360,000 gallon plant. We have 57 miles of wastewater collection lines, 17 lift stations which produce 8 miles of force main, 650 manholes, which are nearly 3,000 customers, not as many as the water side. We do wholesale we take WCID's water and we take, by the way, Camp RV Park wastewater and treat it for them. When we still have customers in our area, in our CCN on septic system. Our wastewater averaging now is 925,000 gallons per day. Our personal wastewater flow is 97.4 gallons per day. And our maximum permit for our wastewater treatment plant is 1.4 million gallons per day. As I told you, it is broken into 2 different plants, which is very important because of the way it is. If something happens to the larger 1 million gallon plant, we only have a 300,000 gallon plant to try to treat everything. And it just will not fit. Maintenance, as y'all know, we're doing tons of maintenance as said a little bit earlier, we are TVing every single line that the city has. We're starting in the areas that we know we have to start with the streets. We're trying to combine each to where we're not laying down a new street and then tearing it up to fix the infrastructure.
I want to take a minute and brag on Curtis's crew. To address the mayor's question earlier, do we know what we have and where? When they televise or camera a line, they are absolutely making drawings of every connection, distance. So not only do we have it on GPS, but the crews are learning the system. They're learning the elements of that system. They're learning how to maintain that system. And Curtis was really impressed when he sent them on a task. They did way more than he expected. So they really appreciate the challenges of the system they have to maintain. They've taken personal responsibility for that and are truly leaving that better than we found it. So when we have this question asked of us in a few years, we'll be able to answer it without question, what's there and how it works.
That is so true. The guys are impressive in what they get done in the amount of time and what is asked of them. Like I said, we have 57 miles of collection system, all the wastewater collection lines with failed streets. That's what we're working on. You drive down the street and you see the street sunk in, that's probably because we had problems with the wastewater infrastructure. The line's cracked. That's what's making that happen. Y'all welcome to jump in and help me here. Sorry.
Well, in April at the mid-year budget retreat, we're going to present you the pavement condition index study that has occurred. And those streets are graded much like a traffic signal. Green means it's good, and there's a maintenance plan that you do to keep the good streets good. There are streets that are yellow to orange, and they are not as good as they need to be. So you take a different set of maintenance standards to make improvements to extend their useful life, because you're trying to manage a system with finite resources. And then there's red. Red means it's failed, and the only option you have is to rehabilitate that road, because doing anything is just pouring good money into bad. So to Curtis's point, we don't want to go in 2019 and rebuild a street and then go in 2022 and cut it and put in water and sewer lines. So to ensure the long-term estimated useful life of that road, it needs to be in sync. So because we don't have the information we need on our system, he's focusing his energy on the red streets. Those are the ones we know we'll fix first.
Everything is driven by TCQ, as we said before. And everybody knows that. What are the trigger points? 75% of your daily average flow for 3 consecutive months means you have to be under design for a new treatment plant to handle the flows. At 90% average daily flow for 3 consecutive months, the new plant must be permitted and be built. Meaning we're getting close. Our trigger point, everybody, is 1 million to know. That's what we're looking at. And y'all remember earlier, we're at 925,000.
Now, I'm going to put a caveat to this. That is one of the forces driving the development of a new treatment plant. When HDR gets through with their presentation, we are walking a fine line between our current plant lasting long enough to get this done and meeting the TCEQ timetable. So there are competing forces that will dictate when we start this. And so, yes, TCEQ is the one we normally talk about, but he'll get to the place where it may not be 75%, but we can't wait any longer.
Right now, we're running 925,000 gallons a day, which is 68% of the 1.4 million. We talked about the trigger point of 75% is 1 million gallons, 90% permit we went over. But there's a lot of things there are a lot of other factors we're going to be talking about in the future, like our plant. Plant number 1 is a steel plant. We're having issues with the thickness, wall thickness, meaning corrosion. It is eaten down to a point that it may not make it through the year, through next year. So it's something we're gonna have to address, whether y'all decide that we're adding one big plant, do away with that one. Remember that in the back of your mind, that something's gonna have to be done to it. Let's see where we're at.
Mayor and council, in the end of 2016, we had 1,340 available SUEs. We've taken a journey in the last 2 days. We went and put together a chart knowing the development that's in the pipeline. And developments in the pipeline is they've come in and paid impact fees, or they've come in and pulled a building permit, or we've been working with them. We know where they are in the engineering timetable, and we know they're close. So the scary part for us that validated the need for this meeting today is our available SUEs. So we allocated 249 SUEs in 2017. We have this year already allocated 158 of those SUEs on known projects. Well, we're not even to April yet. So we're only a third of the year through, and we have expended about half of what we've done last year. So you look at 2019, and we've expended half of those SUEs if 249 is your baseline, and we're not even to 2019. We've done this almost that much in 2020 with the projects we know online that are going to take 18 to 24 months. So today, we've only got 641 SUEs available, and we've not completed 2018, haven't gotten to 2019, and haven't gotten to 2020. And oh, by the way, there are opportunities for wholesale wastewater agreements with Bastrop West, and that conversation's been going on for almost a decade. The developer has expressed an interest that they want between 1,000 and 1,200 SUEs. Well, we don't have it to build. So even though the calculation of actual demand on the 3 consecutive months that drives this train, we already know that train's coming. We can calculate that with the demand. So we have a sense of urgency given the condition of our existing plant, and a sense of urgency given the development we know is coming.
And why this is important, and this projection is helpful, is because of the length of time it takes to design, get approval, and build this plant. So you're thinking, wow, I'm not going to get 75% until this point. But that's not the case, just because it's going to take 3 years to get you to the process where you start building. So we're forecasting 3 years out ahead to say, hey, this is right around the corner. We've got to move forward.
And this is just for what's in the city right now. This isn't even talking about what people maybe are proposing to add.
That's exactly right.
Yes.
And so, for instance, let's look at Bastrop West as an example to what Trey's talking about. Even if they started design on their project and got all of their infrastructure constructed, they're a couple of years out. And then they build houses. So if we start today and we get this treatment plant online on 2020, about the time they need it, we ought to be there. So we're anticipating not being the impediment to growth. Because to his point, it takes time to get there, and it takes time to develop. We need to be there when we're needed, that just in time, and we're running out of time to be there just when we need to be there.
Yes, you don't want to wait till you hit that 75%. You want to be ahead of that 75%.
Is that 1340 to get to 75% or 90?
It's to get to 75.
No, go back.
Because I
The 1340 is to get to 90.
You're right, I'm sorry.
And so at 90, you need to be permitted. And then you've got a short window, because at 95, you're done. They consider that max. So we're trying to get to a place that when 90 hits, we are under construction. So our growth that's growing faster than we are today, we're not saying we can't take you because we don't have capacity.
have a permit to build a new plant.
Curtis, if that's on your back because it's short, well, sit down over here at a mic. That'll help you. You're making my back hurt.
Just don't know the slides in the order.
You're doing awesome.
Yep, doing a great job.
New permit plant under the 317 rule, which explains expires
Little close.
You got
September
to,
19th.
yeah, you got to get up in there.
All right, I'm sorry. Little help between help. TCQ issued the new 217 in August 2020.
So why this is important? Because we're talking about the plant that was designed, the current plant that we had designed, which will be found not to be a complete plan, was designed under the set of rules that were 317. So in 2008, they changed to the 217 rules. And it's just a difference in the way that the plant's designed and the flow rates and the way it's built, things like that. So the plant that you actually designed 10 years ago started behind the curve. That's what's really important to point out about this slide is what was in place then was already obsolete or behind the standard. So we just didn't think that was a good idea. We wanted to take some time to review it.
One of the things on this permit that, because when we kept having conversations with the engineer, it kept being, well, your permit's going to expire, your permit's going to expire, your permit's going to expire. Okay. So we didn't, or it was really more me, I didn't understand the issues about why that was a big deal. Art Rodriguez and Brad Bullock are water and wastewater attorneys, and they are with George Hyde's firm. So we called and had a conversation with Art and Brad about, should we be concerned? Is there really a risk for letting this permit expire and obtain a new permit under the new rules? And the difference in the permit is more stringent quality of water discharge. I think we ought to be responsible for leaving the water that's in the Colorado River as good as we can. We are a downstream product of that, and I think that we owe those downstream an opportunity to have good water so that they're not in the same challenge we are with the alluvial wells of Willow and Bob Bryant. So when we talked about this internally, this is just the responsible thing to do for the next 30 years.
I agree with you. I think that's a really good position for us to take. Did we have to pay for that permit when we pulled it, or is it just something you kind of filed for and then you pay when you build?
It's been renewed 3 times, and it's somewhere between $12,000 to $15,000 to renew it.
Okay, and it's just, okay.
And that was the 3rd time and the final time that we could renew it. And everybody was pushing them to get the deadline because it's going to expire September 1st, 2019.
So at this point, y'all are just thinking we're
just let it go and let's do it right.
And pull the correct permit now.
Yes, because the next slide, which again was my journey to take, the design is for 1 million gallons, and BEFCO designed it in 2007. So that plant today is 11 years old in the context of the design. It assumes wastewater treatment plant number 1 and number 2 remain in service. Curtis, when he gets done with his presentation, is going to convince you that's probably not a good idea. So extensive rehabilitation is required if they stay in service. So the question is that a good investment of your money? Probably not. Part of the interesting thing for me is that staff had never seen these plans. And so they've been out there 11 years. We didn't have a context for them. So we got them, and I believe HDR evaluated them as a part of the options they're going to be talking to you about. And they were not, they're not complete designs. We don't know if that's because the project was put on hold or whatever, but there were some pretty significant components not included in this design to the tune of about $5 to $6 million worth. What was driving this was 26 acres for a new plant that was purchased in 2005. HDR has evaluated that and will tell you it's a good location. So our takeaway with this information and our conversation with the water wastewater attorneys is we just need to park this conversation. It's irrelevant. So now, how do we make this better? So the permit that was out there, the fact we'd already paid for a design, does not improve the current improve our situation from where we are today, long-term or maintenance-wise. So we're just going to say we evaluated it. It fails to meet the test on the comp plan. It fails to meet our test. So wastewater treatment number 3, as designed, is off the table. And that's really what we wanted to say here. We've looked at it. We've evaluated. It's a no-go. So with that, Curtis, please continue.
Knowing a new plant must be in operation no later than 2022. Well, that could be true and it could not be true. It depends a lot on which way we go. Are we going to open up growth? Are we going to shut the doors? If we don't shut the doors, then what are we going to do? But what we do know as of today is that plant 1 is needing attention. It's not going to last. So are we going to build out there enough to take everything out there to one central location, as we're trying to do with water, to where now we can manage the growth, now we can have the treatment process that will best treat this wastewater that we have? Or are we going to just stay in the same old can that we've been kicking down the street and wait until it collapses? When that plant collapses, now you're going to be paying fines. It's going to happen. So that y'all can believe. Because when that plant goes down, yes, I can put all that wastewater through that 360,000 plant, but I can't hold it. I can keep it for a little while, but I can't. Just because the solids are going to build up, the ammonia is going to build up. You're going to bust permit every month. So now every month, you're going to pay $10,000 whether you want to or not. It's just that simple. I'm very proud of the wastewater plant down there. Right now, when we run our tests in the labs, they use lab water. When we test for the biomonitoring, testing of the animals, the fleas and minnows, we can't test against the river. Our water is better than the river. So they test against the lab water. So yes, we take our job very seriously down there. And I'm very proud of the guys down there. But it's come to the point in time that we're going to have to do something, otherwise we're going to be.
Curtis, remind us which plant we bought for $1.
I'm sorry, what?
Which plant was it that we bought for $1?
That's the plant 1. That's the one we're talking about.
You know, I want, since the mayor has brought this up, I want to talk about God moments just a minute. As we have taken this journey, there have been some God moments, and Mr. Williams is a God moment. Raise your hand. Mr. Williams engineered the plant in Austin we bought for $1. So when HDR gives their presentation, Mr. Williams is going to give you the background on that plant. That's the God moment. We just literally giggled and laughed out loud when he started asking some questions, and we said, yep. Oh, I designed that. I said, oh, and you'll be at the wastewater retreat with council, so you can add some real information. We only could speculate. He can answer your questions. So that's the God moment for this.
Does he know of any other $1 plants that we might buy?
And then get 20 years out of them for $1.
Yeah, that would definitely cut down the design time.
Mayor and council, with this slide, really, Curtis is exactly right. There are 4 elements to this question, and that is the anticipated remaining useful life, and you've heard Curtis say it's speculative. HDR is going to tell you it's in poor condition. They're just going to call it like it is. What is the cost benefit of maintaining 2 facilities versus a consolidation to one centralized facility? The challenge with this is that we've run the GUI out of the plant 1 and 2. So what drives the cost of 2 different facilities is the rehabilitation of 1. Much like the question of how you maintain your streets, at what point in time does it quit making economic sense to rehabilitate a plant that's lived way beyond its useful life. Much like a car that you replace the tires 10 times and everything you can do, the frame rusts out and it's just time to buy a new car. We can all say we have gotten all the gooey and then some out of that investment. So that then led us to the question of what's the long-term efficiency of water treatment options? Is it staying with a packaged plant or is it looking at some other solution? And then the real question for us is how long will it take to realistically redesign and build that treatment plant? Because Curtis has said exactly right. We don't know if we got a problem tomorrow, or we're going to have a problem 12 months, 24 months, or we're going to get to the end of this journey and have just gotten flat lucky. Unlike some things, the TCEQ has a process, and you're not going to shortchange the process. So there is a finite amount of time, even if we put the afterburners on to try to fix that we can make this happen. So there's a whole lot of risk associated with this, and I'm working hard to help you understand that staff can make you no guarantees here.
Well,
Well,
like, again, just what it says at the top, we know that by 2022 we have to be online and built, but we're hoping we can make it that long. That's what she's trying to say.
So this is my question. Sometimes when you're in a process, for example, you're saying, you know what, I know we have this old permit, but we really want to adhere to the new rules, so we really want to do what you, does that give you any sort of grace with TECQ if you're making, just let me finish, if you're making an attempt to meet the new standards, you could very easily have just stayed with where you are, but you're like, you know what, we're in a spot here, we're taking over, we're going to do the above and beyond, we're doing, does that give you, do they work with you at all on that?
I have actually visited with Curtis and Trey about that. TCEQ has buckets where they have standards for the various components of the process. And so the $10,000 fine is because we're creating an environmental hazard because we can't contain our flow. That's a bucket. It is what it is. The fact that we can contain it and limit our fine to that amount, the fact that we're in process of planning and doing it right gets us grace on some other buckets that we probably get fined, but we're going to get fined in that bucket because we violated that rule of TCEQ.
And it may just dictate the level of fines. Like Curtis said, you're going to get one, but they could do 10,000 a day if they wanted to. So if they saw that you were fixing to finish a plant, you're probably still going to get you're still going to get a violation.
So they're going to work with you, I guess, because you're going and trying to do everything properly.
Yes, ma'am, but they're not going to let you get away without paying something.
That's right. Free. That's right.
Okay.
More on the plant one, we did hire Texas Tank to come out and do scans of the metal, and they found large areas of very thin metal all the way around the plant. Well, you can imagine, this is a plant filled with wastewater with air bubbling in it. Where is the first place it's going to be attacked? You would think the bottom, because it has a metal bottom too. If the sidewalls are thinning like that, what does the bottom look like? That's what really scares me, is the unknown. There's no way we can check those kind of things.
And there's no way to turn the plant off to stop it cleaning, because you would have to keep flushing the toilets every day. So that's another important note.
Yes, said a different way, there's no redundancy. There's no ability to maintain this plant. It's 24/7. It's all we got.
That's correct. Well, what is the cost benefits in maintaining the two facilities, plant 1 and 2, and adding? I guess that means what you're saying is you want to add the plant 3 out there, or consolidate all 3. Well, we already been to this and already know that even if we do put a package plant in at the location where we're at, we can't put a 1 million gallon plant in. You got to put in a 1.4. That's the minimum size that TCQ will allow. We know as soon as we do that, we're taking plant 1 offline, and it's probably going to be rebuilt. So why would we spend the money there when we could go out there and put everything we need to have a future where all we're doing is adding on trains, adding on
clarifiers, and just expanding it as we need it with the growth. That's where I'm coming from.
Can you talk about that a little bit more, because I'm not really clear.
HDR is going to get there and explain that. They'll be up next. Essentially, we know that we have to evaluate the long-term efficiencies of water treatment options, just like you just did with water. There's the same questions that have to be addressed with wastewater. So we hired HDR to do a couple of things. One is evaluate whether a 2-plant system makes sense or consolidation of one. They're going to address that. And then how are we going to treat the wastewater from an operational long-term question is the second piece of that. HDR is going to address that. And then how long will it take to realistically design and build a treatment? We're going to get to that in session 4, but let me just give you a scope of magnitude right now. Because when HDR gets through with their presentation, you're probably going to have a hard time breathing. So the bottom line is this, the 4-year window that we have established, we did because we have some internal capacity challenges. There's just not enough of us to go around. And the second piece of that is managing the rates of how we increase rates to pay for the construction and gradually build that over a period of time. That's optimum. If we get the plant designed and we realize we don't have 2 years and we need to put the afterburners on, we can. That comes at a price. But we'd only do that because we've got a bigger problem on the other side of the river, which is we're now in violation of the TCEQ permit and we're having fines. So understand that 2021 is optimum. It allows us the ability to do this in a manner that's appropriate for our bandwidth and to manage the price of this. But if we get out there and we need to put it in after-drive, we can. So with that, do y'all have any other questions before HDR comes and begins to answer the real serious questions?
My question is, and I'm sorry I'm not clear on this, I know how you were talking about redundancy with water, but we have these plants. Is there one of them you're going to keep for backup, or is this just the goal is just to go to one central?
When HDR works through their process, they've built in redundancy on the critical components of a centralized plant so that we're not in this same situation. And so that's what they are going to take you through relative to the wastewater treatment process.
If I can expand on that, that's also the change that was made from that 317 rule to 217. So what we didn't want to do is say, hey, this was designed under 317 without that redundancy, which we're currently in that situation. Let's go to the new set of rules that requires that, let that permit expire, make the right decision, give better water quality, and move ahead.
So because of that requirement, they're building redundancy into that one centralized system.
Yes, ma'am, and they'll walk you through that. So if HDR wants to come, you can either sit at the table if you're more comfortable or...
Good morning.
But first we have to say, Curtis, really good job.
Yes, that was good, yes.
Good morning. My name's John Marler. I'm a project manager with HDR in Austin office. I've been a wastewater treatment engineer for 25 years. I've been with HDR for the last 15. And I'm going to present today on the analysis that you just saw, what we were asked to do, feasibility study of the alternatives of what I'll call the 2007 plan, the existing plan, versus what we're going to call alternative B in this presentation, and then the report that we gave to the city of a new consolidated facility, and kind of walk you through the details of what was analyzed and what the this feasibility level construction and O&M cost estimates are over a 30-year useful life of each alternative. And yes, the theme of today's presentation is don't shoot the messenger. Please. Okay, a little background information. Curtis went through the population. You're nearing the trigger levels that Curtis talked about in the 75-90 rule with TCEQ. There's a lot of growth, as you know, along 71 and a lot of planned development that would overwhelm the current system in the next couple of years. So you're going to need to do something to add capacity. And I think the city's known that for some time. Obviously, in 2007, there was a lot of development and growth, just like there is today. And then, of course, the bottom fell out of the market in 2008, and things kind of got put on hold for a while. But we're kind of back to where we were at that point in time. So now it's time to look at, what's needed to move forward. So there are some similarities and some differences between the alternatives that were analyzed, the 2007 base plan versus the new system. One is the population flow projections, and the shapes of the curves are approximately the same. We use those flow per capita numbers that Curtis was talking about and current population projections to redefine the flow projections. It's essentially about the same as the BEFCO curve, just shifted a little bit in time for, again, things didn't take off quite like everyone thought they would in 2008, and so that's just kind of shifted that curve a little bit. But that curve becomes the basis for when you'll need the next phases of expansion. As you look down here, you need 1 million gallons of additional capacity essentially now. When will you need these next phases? And that's what controls the capital expenditures that we'll look at here in a minute. Probably the biggest item, does this have a pointer on it? Yes. Probably the biggest item of difference between the two different alternatives is this flow peaking factor. And for whatever reason, the previous plant was designed for a lower peaking factor of 2.65. And so it's not exactly an apples to apples comparison, because in our evaluation of the alternative B, we used a peaking factor of 4. And that's because we got the actual flow data from the plant. We looked at what kind of peaks you're really seeing. Of course, we had a pretty exceptional rainfall event last August associated with hurricanes, but you actually saw peaks much closer to 4 than 2.65. And TCEQ current criteria is to use 4.0 unless you have some available data to demonstrate that number can be varied from. So that I'll point out what that means in terms of the two different sizing of the two different facilities, but that really is probably the main difference between the two facilities, besides the type of treatment process that we use.
John, before you leave, let's talk about the price differential between 2.6 and the 4 in big terms. One of the challenges that Curtis has indicated is we've not conducted appropriate maintenance on our system. So that 4.0 that they're building is because we had a lot of inflow and infiltration into our system as a result of Hurricane Harvey. Curtis indicated to you at that time that we had identified where we believed that water was coming from. So they went in and did I&I smoke testing in Riverside Grove. Am I right? And there were almost 100 caps of wastewater overflow that were off. And so just doing appropriate I&I smoke testing, we can manage how much of that surcharge that came from Hurricane Harvey just by better maintaining our system. Time will help us. So there isn't data today to argue that 4 is not the right answer. But hopefully in the next 18 months, he has an aggressive plan to address I&I. And it's possible when we get out there, 4 is not the right answer, but we can prove it with data. So today we're doing what we have to do because we've not maintained our system, but we recognize it's a cost escalator and we're going to get busy to manage that if we can.
So this slide is just to describe a little bit of what Linda was talking about, kind of what is I&I and what the peaking factor means. If you look at the curve on the plot, the beige or orange color at the bottom is kind of what your typical diurnal flows look like at a plant. So that's your dry weather. You have this kind of base flow level, then your flows fluctuate as people wake up in the morning, start their day and cook and take their showers. And it has that shape of curve. And then a big rain event comes along and you get something in your collection system that looks like this is actual flow monitoring data from another city that shows the wet weather response to the system and the breakdown of what the fast impervious and slow impervious, the stuff that gets in the ground and then trickles into your pipes through the gaps in the connections and along the pipeline. But the 4.0 that we're talking about is sort of the ratio of this peak to this average dry weather phase. And you have to size facilities, you have to size your pump stations to be able to move that much water. Otherwise it backs up in your system. You have to size your plant to be able to handle that peak when the pumps bring it to the plant, or else it overwhelms the plant. So it really is building in some conservativeness so that you're able to ride out those peaks and you don't wash out your clarifiers, which is really the main piece of the equipment at the plant that it impacts. And I think we'll look at that as we go through. Headworks, clarifiers, and the disinfection on the back end of the plant, those are really the 3 main things that peaking factor affects. So taking a step back and looking at your existing facilities, you've got two plants, the smaller plant which is a concrete tank, original small package plant. These are commonly called Bullseye Plants. The biological treatment, because it's a circle and looks like a bullseye. The biological treatment takes part in that outer ring where you see the aeration happening, and then the center of the bullseye part is the clarifier. It's built into the tank and it's all one unit. They're inexpensive to build. Very often the cheapest way to get wastewater treatment. Very often built by developers, very commonly called development specials. And the steel tanks are the cheapest to buy. As Curtis pointed out, these numbers are actually wrong. This is a 0.4, and this is, 0.396, and this is 1.04. But it's essentially 0.4 and 1. And the reason that's important is the 1 plant is plant number 2. It's the larger of the 2, and you're currently averaging 0.93 MGD. So you can't take plant 2 offline to affect the repairs because plant 1 won't handle your flow today, dry weather base flow today. And so here's a picture of that plant, and you can see that's corrosion through the internal baffle wall of the plant. I just went out and visited the plant, talked with Curtis, got some background information, and came back to your office and we're talking with Trey about what is the condition of the plant. Well, I don't have x-ray vision, so I wasn't really able to tell him exactly, but we talked about next steps. What would we do? Get get someone with ultrasonic gauge out there and measure tank wall thickness, and that's the report that Curtis was talking about. And I don't know if you, now may be the time to have Stan tell you about the history of this plant, if you're interested, because I don't have it built in anywhere else in the presentation.
Hi, I'm Stan Williams with HDR. I've been in business 43 years. I was involved in the, in fact, I was a designer of the wastewater plant that you bought for $1 from the city of Austin back in the, well, we built it in the mid-'80s. I still remember that day very well, when this was before computers, before cell phones, very primitive compared to today's technology and capabilities. And I got a call late in the afternoon from the director of water and wastewater at the city of Austin. Can you meet me out at the Williamson Creek plant? They were huge violations, and said, what can we do? And well, we need to build a wastewater plant expansion. And he said, I will have bulldozers here in the morning. Okay, well, that means you had to know what the bulldozers were going to do. So I went back to the office, got back after 5 o'clock, no computers, no cell phones to call people for help. I designed the plant that night, got a flashlight out, broke into our surveying office, got chaining pins, tape measure, lath, magic markers, and went out to the plant, put chaining pins in the ground and stretched the tape measure, figured out how big it was supposed to be with my notes from design. This is like 3 or 4 in the morning now. And at 5 o'clock, guess what? The bulldozer showed up and started moving dirt. That plant was built in 67 days. From the start of design, which was a one-day deal, basically. Yeah, they were trucking sewage. They were spending thousands of dollars a day trucking sewage from the Williams Creek wastewater plant to other treatment plants around the city. And they were facing $5,000 a day per permit violation, which could have been easily $25,000, $30,000 a day if they didn't get this done quickly. So it was built on a very emergency type basis, extremely emergency type basis. We didn't take the time to make sure all the steel was properly coated and protected. We needed to get this thing in service. At this time, the reason they called us was we were designing the Onion Creek, now called the South Austin Regional Wastewater Treatment Plant, and it was still a couple years out. So this plant was designed for about a 2-year life, and I don't even think it lasted that long. I think we accelerated the South Austin plant and actually got it online a little quicker, and then this one went out of service. I don't really know the time frame between it went out of service and when you bought it, but that plant was sitting idle and certainly not maintained in that period of time as well. Now, a steel tank like this, if it went through all the proper designs, is probably a 20-year life, unless you can take it out of service, brush blast it, coat it, repaint it, and that sort of thing. Well, it was sitting idle with no maintenance for a couple of years. You bought it. I don't think you've ever been able to take it out. It's been used. I don't think you've ever been able to take it out of service. The fact that this thing has lasted 35 years or whatever it's been is amazing. It's truly amazing. And well, I don't know if you were planning on getting into this, but the ultrasonic testing that was done shows that where they measured, they can only measure it in very discrete spots, right? You choose a spot and measure the thickness. And I think there's something like 75 to 90% of the thickness is gone in some places. It's just not there. It's corroded away. This last summer, another utility called me out. They had corrosion on a steel tank. So I went out there and looked at it. You really need to get this taken care of right away. Well, rather than building a new tank, they called a welder out to see if he could patch it up. Well, they didn't use the ultrasonic testing. He took a hammer and started tapping to see where he could weld into, where the metal might be thick enough. Well, he tapped in the wrong spot. And that spot is about as thick as probably some of what yours is right now. And it punched a hole in the tank, and they lost the entire tank. And so it's a pretty alarming situation when you lose a tank like that, and certainly we wouldn't want that to happen here.
What I think is impressive is you just told us you can design our plant in a day.
Actually, it was less than that. It was about what?
18 hours.
Yeah, it's awesome, thank you.
Believe me, even though it was designed very quickly, when it was built in 67 days, they paid about a factor of 3 in excess acceleration type costs. You really don't want to do it that quick.
So Mr. Williams shared that with us today, and when you now have that, it will help John's presentation make more sense. The scariest part for us when we got the results of this, the comment was exactly what John said is, don't tap it with the hammer, don't hit it with the weed eater, and be careful with the mowers. And that's just not where you need to be. So that puts into perspective the importance of what John is about to say. And the God moment was Mr. Williams was in the original meeting, and you got to hear this story to really put into perspective the value that we have achieved out of this. We've gotten way more than it was designed to do for way longer than it should have. Now we have to do different.
Linda, the only other thing I'd like to add, because the folks at home, not everybody knows where the wastewater treatment plant is, note that it's down, that's the river on the left side. So if it does get hit, all of that raw sewage is going straight into the Colorado River. And that is completely contrary to, we want to be good stewards, we want to be doing the right thing. So I just wanted to finish that last point. It's not going to leak into a field that's in the middle of nowhere. It is going straight to the Colorado River, and I believe that the fines may not be able to be calculated by science if that was to happen.
So just like we've had all these built-in maintenance costs, they're going to offset the construction of the new water. We've had really no maintenance costs on this, so we're like looking at putting costs in that we really never had to deal with.
That's not the way I would look at it. I would look at it from the perspective of, we have really as a city 3 basic functions. And that's what makes a city. There's a certificate of convenience and necessity called a CCN. So all cities flush toilets. All cities run water. All cities do streets. So the way you have to look at this is not in cost of maintenance, but a failure to meet our fundamental mission, is the toilets aren't going to flush. And the ability to bridge when they quit flushing and they can flush is a gap that is what Mr. Williams just described to you that Austin was in. So we can't look at this the way we did with water. It is a matter of being able to provide service or not. And can we get enough life out of it to do it right, or are we going to be in an emergency situation pushing it? So long-term maintenance will be addressed by John in the right decision, but there isn't enough maintenance quick enough to bridge the concern that y'all should be having for existing customers.
I guess the point I was trying to make is that money hasn't really been part of the equation.
No,
like
we
what
haven't
we're seeing on
maintained the
water
system.
side. I'm not really pushing for maintenance as much as that's why this is going to be shocking, because we haven't really been paying.
So before John finishes, let me put into perspective, the mayor made a very good point. Water, we had a conversation for managed growth. We're having a conversation about wastewater to just keep the toilets flushing for the citizens we have today. That's the conversation we're having today with wastewater. And I think her point is very, very valid, because when you see the price tag of this, people are going to say, well, I don't want to spend that money for new people. No, we're spending that money for current people. You're going to want new people to help pay for it. So for those that don't want to grow, they're going to want to grow to pay for it. So it's a way different perspective, 2 different scenarios. So with that, John, help us.
Okay, I'll try to continue through the rest of this presentation fairly quickly. Here's a map of locations of both the existing site, plant, and its relationship to the river, and the site that the city owns, the proposed site, kind of over off of 304 on the other side of the river. Conveniently located to serve the 71 area and western part of thing. You can see houses right here. It's a big subdivision.
That's correct.
So we had one of our staff archaeologists pull some records. One of the things you do just to sort of vet a site is to look at floodplain and archaeology, things that will need to be cleared before you can construct. And there are a couple of recorded archaeological sites on the edge of this property. So that'll have to be vetted and cleared before you can do construction. That's not a big issue. It's very common to have these kinds of sites along the banks of the Colorado River. But that's one of the things that will need to be done in order to move forward in permitting and construction of a new facility. So, starting to look into the two alternatives that are compared, and this is alternative A is the 2007 plan. It's planned to build a new treatment facility on this site. Headworks, a pre-engineered biological treatment system, 2 clarifiers, and a pad for you to be able to bring your sludge press over from the other plant alternating days or something like that. I'm not sure exactly what the thought was, but that was what was in that. And then a build out in the future of some additional sludge handling facilities. There were some items that were shown sort of as future in the original plan site, and then a phase 2 expansion up to the 3 MGD. The reason those phases are shown is because we've done a 30-year life cycle cost projection of both capital and O&M, and in 30 years you'll have to expand this plant. Even if you build what was designed by BEFCO in 2007. So the phase 1 and the kind of the solid red colored items that you see on that site plan are what was intended to be built, phase 1. And then you'd have to build the phase 2 as the flows increase in the future. And so that's what's the basis, that and using the 75-90 rule triggers for those flow rates is how we decided when that next cost increment would hit the project, and it's the basis for the capital cost estimates. The only other thing to point out on this map is the blue area is the floodplain. So the edge of there's a creek drainage through here, and so you can't build down into the floodplain, obviously. So that constrains somewhat the available area of the site. The other line that's on here is the buffer zone that's required by TCEQ from property boundary for the heart of the treatment process, the stinky processes, if you will. Some of these facilities, like an admin building or maintenance facilities, they can be within that buffer zone, but the actual treatment processes themselves, TCEQ wants you to keep at least 150 feet from the neighbor's lot line, essentially. So that's what those are, is kind of showing the constraints within the site and how the proposed facilities would fit within that site. Here's kind of a schematic to give you an idea of what the treatment process looks like for alternative A. And the biggest thing to note is that the proposal was for what's called a carousel treatment plant. It's a folded closed loop bioreactor, sometimes called a racetrack. But oxidation ditch is the sort of technical term for it. But it is a single tank that has all of the biological process going on inside of it. And then the water flows out of that into the clarifiers where you separate the solids from the liquid. And then a portion of the solids are returned back to the plant, right? That's the activated sludge treatment process. The thing to note here is that these clarifiers were sized at 56 feet. And again, and the coring contact basin was sized for a 2.65 peak. And those units, their sizing is controlled by that peak loading. So what that means is that if you ever have loading's higher than 2.65, your average flow, then you're stressing that clarifier, which is, something that makes it difficult for the operators to be able to maintain and make sure that they're not exceeding effluent total suspended solids concentrations. But this is the schematic of what alternative A would look like. And then to cost this out, we use a tool that HDR has developed called the water cost. It's a program that we've developed in-house that is actually pretty sophisticated in that you can put in some of these unit processes like a clarifier, and I can put in 56 feet, and it actually calculates earthwork volumes, concrete volumes, puts costs into it, and uses cost codes from other construction projects to come up with the mechanical, electrical costs and that type of thing. And it is a very useful tool for generating this feasibility or planning level budget numbers. One thing I will say is that it is fairly conservative, which means that the numbers tend to be on the high side, which at this planning stage you want to be at that level and not be low. But the same program was used for both alternatives, and basically we just put the unit processes into the program, and then load it up. And the next piece of the puzzle, of course, is when you would have to build the future phases and expansions. Again, we're looking at a 30-year life through, for the cost estimate. And so you'd have to build this phase 2 expansion roughly in 2028. And so, but you don't have to expand everything, only parts of the plant have to be expanded. The other item that you have is rehabilitation at the East plant. And to be honest with you, that number is an estimate of what it will take. Until you can take that tank offline and get into it and actually inspect it and start blast cleaning and see where you blow holes through the metal, and you're guessing at what the repairs are, but it's not in good shape. And in order to keep these kinds of plants running, you have to replace the equipment, you have to upgrade, you have to replace the blowers, you have to upgrade piping. You've actually replaced the clarifier mechanism in this plant once or twice. And so this is probably a decent number for what you're looking at just in the short term in terms of needs to rehabilitate the existing plants to keep them in service.
So to put into perspective what John just said, when you take the 5 million, the 6 million, and the 9 million, that's about 22 million of the $42 million that you're spending to keep what you got that's not working. So is that the right answer? So that's really in alternative A, the part that you have to factor in when you look at the cost of doing it right. So to keep what you got and add that second plant is $42 million, 22 million of which you're guessing at what you need to keep what you got.
So we also looked at operation and maintenance costs based somewhat on what the existing operating, we got your operating budgets, and we use that to help look at labor being one of the bigger costs, but also looking at energy usage at both the existing plant, what you're paying in your actual kilowatt hours per year today, and then applying the energy number to the new plant. So these numbers include operating, all 3 plants, but at both sites, right? And the biggest number here is labor, because you have two different plants, two different sites, and you will have two different permits, and you'll have to have operators over there. You just really can't have one set of staff running back and forth trying to keep both facilities. So there's more labor and more management needed for both plants. We'll get into that a little bit more detail later. And then again, we bumped it up when you go to the next higher flow. There's a little bit more energy use. There's a little bit more O&M, annual maintenance required. Alternative B was to look at a new centralized treatment facility in the same location, the site that you already own on the west side of the river, but is based on a more conventional activated sludge treatment plant instead of the racetrack carousel system that was in the 2007 design. This is what we call conventional activated sludge with multiple treatment trains, which will show. And so again, the red would be phase one, what's needed initially, and then the blue solid lines would be phase two, the next phase of expansion, and then the future phases, out even further would be the dash blue lines. Part of the reason we went through this exercise is just to make sure it fits on the site and it is feasible and you can get the capacity, long-term capacity that you need at the site, and it does, as you can see, even with the constraints with the buffer zone and the floodplain. So here's what the process kind of looks like schematically versus the other plant. The big difference being that you've got multiple aeration basins. Again, that's where the biological treatment process happens, is in those tanks. One big difference between these tanks and the biological process in the other system is that these would use compressed air and fine bubble diffusers to get oxygen into the water, and that's what the bugs need to do their thing and break down the waste. The bugs being the bacteria that actually do the work in the
Heebie-jeebies is the way Trey would describe that for you.
Versus the racetrack plant, the oxidation ditch uses a surface aerator, which is just a big rotary brush that stirs up the water and works the air into the water. So there's some efficiency there. This is a more efficient process for getting the dissolved oxygen into the water. So it less horsepower per 1,000 gallons treated is kind of the way to think about that. And again, this is back to why I went into the peaking factor issue, is because we sized our clarifiers a little bit larger. The only difference is that this peaking factor, but we assumed, you can see it went from 56 to 65 feet in diameter, but it is a more robust and reliable system with a little bit larger clarifier, and you can ask your operators whether they would like a larger or smaller clarifier, and I think they give you a pretty consistent answer. So again, those are the differences in cost items. Otherwise, you can see like the headworks is essentially the same between the different facilities. This is the big number that I think Linda was warning you about. It's considerably higher initial capital cost because you're building all of the capacity new in one place versus relying on your existing facilities to continue in service and being able to work with them. And so we also did the same process with the O&M, and even though the energy efficiency is a little more efficient in the fine bubble system, you're treating all the wastewater, at that facility. So the energy costs are about the same. The maintenance cost is about the same, but the maintenance but the labor for operations is less because you've got one consolidated facility and you don't have two different plants that you're trying to keep online and manage. And there's just daily rounds of samples, and the operator has to be there to make sure things are functioning properly. And you get the benefit of consolidation here with a single larger plant. So the annualized, the total 30-year value of the annual O&M is considerably less for that reason alone in the consolidated facility plan. And then there are a number of non-monetary considerations that we put in our report, and some of the things that we've talked about with staff, but management, again, of one plant versus two permits. You have to file all the same paperwork for a permit, whether it's a 1 MGD or a 3 MGD. And again, staffing requirements are greater for two different facilities spread apart versus one consolidated. The redundancy and the ability to take the trains offline is obviously a big factor in the design of any treatment plant. You're in the situation you're in now with the steel plant over off Water Street because you can't take it offline because there's no available redundancy. It's hard to put a cost number to that, but it's extremely valuable. And a multi-train conventional plant would give you the ability to take trains offline and effect repairs because a much smaller fraction of your total capacity is, per train. And the other benefit of building a new consolidated plant is that you've got a brand new plant, and everything is all new, and that there's a lot to be said for that in terms of system reliability, and then the ability to handle the peak flows, as we've talked about quite a bit. And then the other thing that if you design the plant well, the ability to meet future regulatory conditions as effluent limits change. They rarely get less stringent, and so the ability to design the plant to be able to flex into a phosphorus limit is much easier to do with a conventional plant than a single tank oxidation ditch type design. It's just easier to put anaerobic basins at the head of the plant or plan for that in the case that your permit limits change. So for all those reasons, alternative B sort of checks the box, if you will. So here's the summary of, you've already seen these cost numbers in the 30-year O&Ms, and this is how it sort of totals out over the 30-year useful life of each project, and slightly more expensive capital costs, but the O&M number is significantly less, which results in alternative B being cheaper over the 30-year life. And with that, I'll take any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you.
No questions? All right.
Thank you, John.
Sure.
Yes, sir, hence why I told you it was shock and awe before we started. So I want to go back and walk through some of the salient points of the presentation. And as I mentioned when we started, all of the PowerPoints and the reports will be uploaded at the conclusion of this workshop. But I have pulled this language from HDR's report, and I'm going to read it because it becomes the basis on which you must make this tough decision. Wastewater treatment plant number 1 and number 2, that is the process we have today, are in a state of disrepair and need to have substantial work done to ensure proper operation and treatment. Wastewater treatment plant number 2 especially needs work as the pre-manufactured system is approximately 40 years old. You heard Mr. Williams say it had an expected life of about 20 to 25 years. It was relocated in the 1980s for the use in the city of Bastrop system. A study by Texas Tank Services, which is dated December 22nd, 2017, suggests localized metal loss in the tank wall exceed 70% at each of the 5 levels investigated. Metal loss at one measurement location, approximately 5 feet above the base, was measured at 87%. The losses were computed using estimated plate thicknesses for the original tank, as no record drawings were available. If a safety factor of 2.0 was used in the original construction, as is common for tank design, many areas currently have a safety factor of less than 1, based on the recent assessment by Texas Tank Services report dated December 22nd. A safety factor of less than 1 indicates a significant and immediate deficiency in the structural integrity of the tank. With so much of the wall thickness compromised, in-service rehabilitation involving adding new plates may not be a prudent approach. Welding temporarily reduces the steel strength at the weld site, so the process of attaching the supplemental plates could actually initiate a failure. To do the rehabilitation in the dry would require taking the tank offline for several weeks, which may not be feasible. The most prudent remedy appears to be to replace the degraded tank capacity with new capacity. Over the next several years, significant capital projects will need to be scheduled to rehabilitate the equipment and structures at wastewater treatment plant number 1 and number 2. So, your comprehensive plan water goals are 2. 1 is to expand the wastewater collection and treatment in a manner that's cost effective. And number 2 is to enhance wastewater system efficiency. The way I have processed 2.5 is this. You have to be able to provide wastewater system services in order to be efficient. And we're to a place we're not even sure we can service them. When you compare Alternative A and Alternative B based on the life cycle of the dates John gave, Alternative A is going to require about $34.8 million worth of investment in the next 10 years. Alternative B will only require $25 million in the next 10 years. Phase 3, which occurs in 2038 for alternate A, is $9 million. In 2035, a good almost, well, I guess it's 17 years from now, would require a $21 million investment. So it's pay me early or pay me later. The pay me later is the most efficient of the options. So there's about a $4 million difference between alternate A and alternate B. But 20 million of that 42,000 is to rehab plant number 1 and number 2, which has already exceeded its useful life. So the question becomes, is that the right answer? 42 million, yes ma'am, thank you for that. The capital and O&M cost between the two becomes really relevant. There's about a $4 million difference in capital costs, but there's really about an $11 million cost in operations over the useful life of that asset. So from a cost-effective manner, alternative B, even though the numbers are huge, looks to be the most obvious, as well as meeting 2.5. Right now, we have 2 required permits. You heard John say for a lot of reasons why 1 is important. Alternate A has no redundancy. Alternate B does. Alternate A only has the peak quotient of 2.65. What we probably haven't talked about publicly because we needed the context of this conversation to do this. In Hurricane Harvey, if you did not have as quality a staff as you do, we'd have been in an epic mess in Hurricane Harvey. I'm not sure Curtis slept much for about 3 days trying to manage all of the surcharge in a plant that was never designed to manage that kind of surcharge. And you've got to have a very intimate understanding of your system and its capabilities to do that. So as we move forward, that's a very unsafe place to be. So that peak factor and capacity becomes very important. I would indicate to you that alternate A does not meet your comprehensive plan objectives, but alternate B does. So now let's talk about the scope of magnitude, because this is the shock and awe. We took the rates that, we took the construction cost and the operation and maintenance cost that HDR have provided to us, and we provided them to Melissa, who is our rate consultant. Right now, our base rate is $10.64, and what typically drives your base cost is that it pays for the debt. That's been the philosophy of this city to this point. And so if we took this debt and built it in a base rate, we would move from a $10.64 base rate to $60 in 2022. That's worst case scenario.
Our base rate's like $26.
Okay, well,
Yeah,
I
just wanted to.
Well,
so it's not as.
Okay, I took what was written in there and I must have got it out of the wrong deal, but whether it's $20 to $60, that's 3 times the cost, and so that's going to be a huge issue. If I got the right numbers out of the report, the volumetric rate would increase from $1.69 to $5.33. So there's no way to do this without there being a, shockwave through the community. What costs are not involved in this, because that was not part of the request, is there is no capital improvements built into these cost projections to get the wastewater flow from plants 1 and 2 to the wastewater plant that would be built. So that's an additional cost.
That's specific to Plan A?
No, it's specific to get everything to Plant B. One of the things that could make a huge, not a huge difference, but could certainly offset is taking the excess capacity that we are going to build into this system to be prudent and sell it at a wholesale rate to external customers. So right now, the way any excess capacity has been negotiated has been in a separate development agreement with each developer on a case-by-case basis. That really is not, in my opinion, the way to manage your system effectively for your customer. And staff always hears me say this. Is anytime I approach a problem, the first question I ask is, who is my customer in this situation? And in this situation, right now, the people using Plant A and Plant B are the people that write my check and sign my check every 2 weeks, and that's the citizens that are here. So my interest in external developers that are not going to be in the city of Bastrop, that aren't going to pay taxes, but need our services to make their development work and to make their money, what they think are irrelevant, honestly. So what a wholesale wastewater contract and rate does is allows you to determine the conditions with which you want to sell your capacity and at what price. And we're going to consistently treat anybody that wants that deal the same way. So, for instance, if you're in North Texas, you've got regional wastewater treatment plants different than the way we manage in Central Texas. So whether the city of Dallas is processing your water, the wastewater, the city of Garland is processing your wastewater, or the North Texas Municipal Water District is, they all have a consistent contract and you pay the same rate. So we definitely, now that we have this huge expense, need to take that journey. We need to add a rate class to our rate schedule for a wholesale wastewater rate and have a contract that helps us manage the capacity cost with that relationship. We do know, just like we know in water, what the cost of managing, and I said that because I cut and copied and pasted and didn't catch it, but we now have a 10-year wastewater system maintenance plan with solid data that we can control that's built into the rate. Just like water, impact fees collected above the projected growth will help offset this cost when the time comes. Once we have a designed plant, we'll have a better estimate of construction. John spent some time explaining to you that they have a model that they put this data in to get conceptual drawings. It's conservative. Our hope is once we have a better design and a better understanding of the cost, that this shock and awe number will decrease. So instead of being 22 million, it might be 17 million, but $4 million at this point is $4 million. So that's important. Once we get actual construction cost of the plants, we would need to go back and recalculate our impact fee rates now, taking into consideration the actual cost of that investment. We would restructure our wastewater rate classes just like we would our water classes to include multiple tiers. So instead of treating everybody the same, we now will allocate the cost based on usage. And Alyssa has indicated, as politically correct as she can, is that we quote unquote don't usually see those types of policies as we move forward in calculating the rates. So, we right now do winter averaging on wastewater rates for commercial applications, and that's not typically the way that happens because commercial applications are not your typical residential use. And so let me say it this way. In the winter months, a resident that waters the yard doesn't water the yard. The grass isn't growing. But in the summer, the resident who does water their grass will contribute more runoff or water to be treated in the wastewater plant. So if it's just water, it doesn't require a treatment level. So you factor that into the rate, and that's why it's called winter averaging. You don't penalize treating landscape water that doesn't require treatment. Yes, and the mayor's made a good point. The reason you have to do that is you meter water, you don't meter wastewater. So we have assumed that all of our commercial accounts follow that same premise, and they don't. So we need to figure out a different way to calculate the users so they're paying their appropriate cost of treating that water instead of assuming that it doesn't need treating. Yes, ma'am, it is what it is, and they need to pay what it costs, and we currently don't do that. So just like water, we aren't going to make any changes to the rates today. But we've got about an 18-month window when we adopt the rates in 2019 to have some final numbers. And so with that in mind, it really would be helpful to me if y'all would react just a little bit to these numbers and kind of talk about the oh my God of this, and let's get some feedback, and then after lunch in session 4, we'll make some final decisions. But at this point in time, I really would like a gut check from y'all to know, A, that you're still breathing and how you feel about this. Because at the end of the day, this is the truth. We don't have any other options. I have used the analogy for a number of years in a number of cities, is you can kick the can down the street, but eventually you're going to run out of roadway and you're going to have to pick the can up and put it in the garbage. The challenge with water and wastewater systems everywhere is you can't see them. So you don't worry about them. You worry about streets because you ride them every day. So there's a level of expectation of maintenance because it's inconvenient, because the smoothness of the road surface is not to our standards. So we do something about it because we're reminded every day of the condition of that road. We're not reminded every day of the condition of our water and wastewater because the toilet flushes every time we flush. Every time we turn on the water, wow, there's water coming out of the system. And so there's no sense of urgency about it. So it's very easy to just kick the can down the street and, oh, we don't want to raise rates. But when you do that, you've now come to understand what the unintended consequences of that choice is. So we're now to a place we have no choice. And this isn't a growth issue. This is, we need the toilets to flush tomorrow. And as complicated as this $42 million choice is over the next 30 years, it's really no more simple than that. Toilets have to flush. And it is what it is. I have been handed this, and the bottom line is, after walking through this, we don't have a choice. So I appreciate we don't like it, but it is what it is.
Yeah, I can't talk because the air's gone, but are there any other cities in the state that would have wastewater rates like we're projecting here?
Yes. Now, whether or not they're as high, I can't speak to that, but anytime you take on a system like that, they're going to be huge. The thing you hope for in a situation like this is you actually grow faster than you think. So let's talk about what growth looks like in this context. Because we have the ability to have excess capacity, we can actually grow out in the county and not grow in Bastrop, and help offset our managed growth through wholesale wastewater accounts. So the faster that we grow through those wholesale agreements, the cheaper this becomes for our citizens. The problem is that they have to initially own the essential cost of this because that's all we got. But between now and then, with a wastewater wholesale agreement that's standard, we can approach some of the other providers. For instance, Aqua has a huge wholesale, has a large wastewater CCN. They have zero interest in ever getting in the wastewater treatment business. So it could be that we could work out an agreement with them where we take and treat their wastewater. So if that's the case, our rate just really went way down for our citizens because we have a population way beyond our borders helping to pay for this asset.
And you can get a greater density with that wastewater versus having septic tank.
But then there's a substantial infrastructure that's got to go in that has to also be paid for. And if you don't have the density, you know, if you look at Bastrop County, certainly, I mean, we have the colony, we have, you know, they have their own system. We have some planned developments in the county, but there's a lot of people out there served by aqua water that are a quarter mile or a half mile apart from one house to the next house to the next house, and putting the infrastructure for that doesn't appear to me to probably be very cost effective.
That would not be who you would attract. It would be developments like West Bastrop, like the colony, that would go in Aqua's wastewater treatment or wastewater CCN, that they would have to make a similar investment to be able to treat. And in lieu of that, they would get it to our system. So we're not going to be picking up their existing customers.
And the point that I was making is that it's unlikely that we're going to pick up many unless there's like a Jacob's Landing that wants to, they're right next door, that would want to pipe in because they're close enough. But, you know, just wholesale offer to the random customers of Aqua doesn't look very practical. And so we really, in our planning, can only look at, as you said, what it is today. And today, these are the customers that are going to have to pay for this. And certainly, I expect that Bastrop will grow just like every other community around Austin has grown. But, you know, it's not happening overnight. And the need for this wastewater system does need to happen overnight. So it's a scary thought.
The one thing that I didn't mention that I will, because that wasn't the point of today. So let's talk about rate making and financing. Once we have some final numbers, we've had some preliminary conversations with our financial advisor because we knew this was going to happen. We can, to some extent, invert the financing, so we're paying less today, and we're letting our growth as it happens pay for the plant. That will help with some of the cost, but it's still going to be a hefty sum. We will, as we figure out these rates, we'll anticipate the question. We'll have the highest rates in the state. Will they be way higher than we are? Yes. Are they going to be the highest? I can't speak to that, but we'll anticipate that conversation and be able to plan for it. But there is a lot between here and paying for it on how we finance it, how we set the rates, how we do the rate classes, and how we embrace the wholesale customer that will matter. The challenge that I want to acknowledge, because this afternoon we're going to get to a question. We know on the Bastrop West question that they have a need for wastewater. We've been having a 10-year conversation that for the developers has been painful. They are waiting on us to do something. And since we've been debating this third wastewater treatment plant since 2007, we've not been responsive. And I have purposely neglected the developer who's going through the mayor because I won't talk to him. And I'm not talking to him because I don't know what to tell him. I don't have an answer. And so now we're going to have a meeting, and I reached out and communicated to him via email this morning, because y'all are going to make some decision matrix today that will make it easy for them to walk in the door. This is what we want. Yeah, well, great. We got this contract. Yes, we've got the capacity. Yes, we can move on. So we know there is another subdivision sitting out there that's wanting to talk to us, but we're not talking to him either because I don't have an answer. So y'all's ability to make some decisions today make us be able to do what we've been able to do for the last 10 years because we had no answers, easier to do more quickly and be way more economic developmentally flexible because we now have answers to the question. So don't let the inability of our past to sell wholesale water dictate how our future is going to occur. Is that a safe way to say that?
Yeah, and a couple of points that I want to make is, and I don't think I'm speaking out of school, and Gary, I think you're well aware of this, there was not probably the best working relationship between Aqua and the city of Bastrop in the past to be able to have a conversation. Clearly, because you meter water as a means of getting that wastewater number, it would be ideally, in a perfect world, your CCNs would overlap, and you'd have the same water CCNs as you have wastewater CCNs. So you have a water supply company with wastewater CCNs that it's an awkward kind of deal. Well, we know, and I am so proud of council, right after the elections last year, one of the first things we did was an interlocal agreement with Aqua, where we would be their emergency backup and they would be our emergency backup. So we've already seen progress, policy, momentum to work together. The main things that I'm taking from these conversations, because I'm sure you guys hear on the street what I hear on the streets, to Linda's point, I'm flushing my toilet. The only time it backs up is when one of my kids flushes a toy down. Like, we don't have a wastewater problem. So there truly needs to be an educational awareness of what happens when you flush that toilet and ultimately where that goes. There's also folks that are like, bring them on, we want everybody, and there's folks, we already have too many people and I don't need any new neighbors. But there is the math and practical aspect of when you're going to make a big investment. Sometimes it's nice if you have a dual income if you're buying a new house than rather than a single income and you're looking at the same house. So to Linda's point, if you say to a person, well, you can pay, your rate can go up by 3 times, or you can have some new neighbors and your rate, and we're not going to be able to say to people that your rate's going to stay the same or go down. That's just the realities of life. But we can lessen the blow if you're willing to take on some neighbors. From a Bastrop West point of view, and the developer is calling me, you have done development in the past. Do you think 10 years is a little long to wait to get an answer of yes or no? And quite frankly, think of that person has worked with several administrations and done it based on a BEFCO plan and different assumptions. So it's been an uncomfortable situation from Linda and an extremely frustrating position for that developer. Because if the answer was no, just say no. And there's other things that can be done. So I know that it's a part of the discussion later on, and I know the point of today is not really rates, but it almost has to be, because there has to be an awareness in the community of exactly where we are. And I think that it is unfair and impractical, and again, I think it's logical, but Gary, you've got a development background. You can't say, okay, well, Buc-ee's has brought us a tremendous amount of sales tax. The Hyatt Lost Pines brought us a tremendous new income of hot funds. You cannot look at 2 potential developers as we now want you to pick up the tab for the entire town. You can't quote a wholesale rate that's impractical and makes their numbers not work, or they're going to say no. So we need to be responsible to the current community, but we cannot be unreasonable with our developers, or you can't make them be the cash cow to protect what we've got. So it's all about balance, and some of that, a majority of that, quite frankly, is policy that we own, that if we will provide that policy direction, it allows Linda to have a conversation with not only developers that have been here, but that developers that want to come, that she can say, you don't have to wait a long time, this is the policy, this is how we do our deal, and have some consistency. The one-off, case-by-case, I understand why it happened in the past, but that puts us in an awkward position with folks that want to do business with us. Councilmember Jones?
Okay, I just want to point out that when we hired the attorney that we have now, his expertise is in development of the ETJ. So I think that's really important, because basically we have someone with experience in doing exactly what you're talking about?
Yes, and they are currently working on a standardized wholesale wastewater agreement. We got a contract from them to review this week, knowing that we would end up here. So one of the early actions, and we'll talk about that this afternoon, that you will need to do is to get that wholesale wastewater agreement worked out so that we do have the ability to sit down with that developer and begin to, that's right, and begin to answer that question. To the mayor's point about it has to be profitable, when we have the conversation with Aqua, we'll talk about the variables and how you manage that as well. The other piece to that is the unknowns, and I want to go back to this chart, to the mayor's point about having a public conversation. She is absolutely right. Over the course of this next year, we do need to have a lot of conversations. So the early conversations are going to be conceptual, just like we're having now. And every one of these questions that have to be addressed, and I have them enumerated this afternoon, gets us a little closer to a better number. So moving forward, between now and when y'all are going to have to adopt some rates at the end of 2019, we'll move off of the $60 number. How much, I don't know. But this really, as far as Tracy and I are concerned, should be worst case. What I didn't want to do today is tell you 40 and then come back and have to tell you 60. So we put out, at this point in time, we think 60 is as bad as it gets. And so it'll come back, we hope, a good place beyond that 60. And if it's 60 and we get to 45, then maybe we're all just applauding. And even though 45 is worse than 20, it's way better than it could have been. But this is a legitimate number. We didn't make this number up to make this palatable. It's what we have, assuming nothing else. So it will get better, but it's, to the mayor's point, a journey that we have to take.
I may be simplistic here, so I want to. Could you go back to the last slide? The numbers there. You presented to us that we don't have any option other than upgrading our system.
You got to spend real money today, millions.
Well, what I'm saying is we're in trouble. We're in trouble, so we got to either look at A or we got to look at B, right?
You have to look at phase 1 of A, which is 22 million, or phase 1 of B, which is 25 million.
But we're going to have to. Sooner or later we're going to have to look at phase 2. If we choose alternative A, we're going to have to look at phase 2, right?
Within the next 10 years.
Okay. So we're looking at a difference in those two options if we do phase 3 and there's costs on each one. We're basically looking at a difference of $4 million.
Today, and within 10 years, you've got to invest $33 million. So to have the capacity you need in the next 10 years, it's $33 million versus $24 million, which is why I built the schedule the way you need to see it. Because in 10 years, if you've got a 30-year life cycle of how you're amortizing your rates, you're not far enough in that investment to be able to significantly reduce your rates. So that $33 million is just going to compound your problem in about 10 years. Does that make sense?
So I don't see that this is a real, I mean, as we talk about rates,
the rates are going up no matter what.
They're going up on either option.
That's right.
What, right?
Yes, sir. So the difference between A and B is your goal 2.5. It's the efficiency with which you manage your system. So John spent some time talking to you about alternative B, and that is you build the mothership, and they're like Lego blocks. You just plug in a Lego block as you add. infrastructure. So alternate B, if we're really looking at the life cycle of a treatment plant, alternate B is that the way to go, and that's why you're going to achieve the $11 million reduction over the 30-year life cycle, which is what we have been charged to do. Over the life cycle of that asset, which one provides collection and treatment in the most cost-effective manner.
So doesn't that also translate into the setting of rates?
Yes. Because if you go with alternative 8 in the next 30 years, the ratepayers will be paying $72 million. Over the next 30 years, alternative B is slightly under 60 million. And that could change with growth, but when you start talking big numbers, $11 million over 30 years is money. It's real money.
So then it translates into kind of a no-brainer in my book.
The choice is a no-brainer, but the cost of that no-brainer decision is epic.
Oh, on either one?
Yes, sir. So if y'all are to a place, we are a little past lunch, so what I'm going to ask y'all to do is we're going to break and move into lunch, and while y'all are eating, I'm going to talk about Aqua on Section 3 so we can stay on track. At this point, before we adjourn, I really want to say a huge thank you to the HDR engineers who have facilitated with quality information our ability to be able to make what Councilmember Ennis has commented on as no-brainer decisions, that we know long-term they're the right answers. Now, HDR cannot fix the cost. So all we needed was to be able to provide quality information based on the circumstances we had today so that you as policymakers felt that you had the best information to make what are not comfortable decisions. And so we appreciate their partnership. We appreciate them coming in on a Saturday and being able to provide what I hope the community and you see is this has been a year-long process in making sure we could provide you quality information to make 30-year decisions from, and we really do appreciate that.
Thank you guys very much, and I think their slides were in yours, so when you add them, we will have all the, so I know my non-engineering council members will want to study them in detail so you can learn more about phosphates and phosphorus. Honestly, you guys, thank you so much. It really helps. You can't, if it's the old garbage in, garbage out. If we don't have good information, we have no ability to make good decisions, and we appreciate having accurate information from you. Thank you.
So Mayor and Council, let's break for lunch, and as soon as y'all get back and get your plates, we'll pick up with Session 3, and that was scheduled to start at 12:15, and we'll stay on track.